A black belt instructor challenged a modest black woman to spar just to make a joke. But what happened next left the entire dojo in stunned silence. Sometimes the quietest people carry the most shocking secrets, and Marcus Sullivan was about to learn why you should never judge a book by its cover. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's continue. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Dragon's Path Dojo in Seattle's Capitol Hill district, casting long rectangles of golden light across the polished hardwood floors. Marcus Sullivan adjusted his black belt for the third time, the crisp white fabric of his GI catching the light as he surveyed his Tuesday evening intermediate class. 23 students knelt in perfect rows, their eyes fixed on him with the kind of reverence that fed his soul. Remember, Marcus's voice carried across the silent dojo, martial arts is about confidence. It's about knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. He paced slowly in front of the group, his dark brown hair perfectly styled even after an hour of instruction. At 32, Marcus had built Dragon's Path into one of Seattle's most respected dojos, and he wore that success like armor. His students nodded in unison, their colorful belts creating a rainbow against their white uniforms. Marcus's chest swelled with pride as he watched them absorb his words. This was his kingdom, his domain where his word was law and his skills were unquestioned. "Sensei Marcus," called out Kevin, an eager blue belt in his early 20s, "could you show us that combination again? The one where you counter the roundhouse with the sweep." Marcus's smile widened. "Of course. But remember, this only works if you're faster than your opponent. If you're dealing with someone who doesn't really know what they're doing." He chuckled, and several students joined in. As Marcus began demonstrating the technique, his peripheral vision caught something that made him pause. In the far corner of the dojo, near the equipment storage, sat a woman he didn't recognize. She was African American, probably in her early 40s, with natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were unremarkable, black leggings, a faded gray t-shirt, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. A small gym bag rested beside her on the bench. What struck Marcus most was her stillness. While his students watched his demonstration with animated interest, she sat perfectly motionless, her dark eyes focused on his movements with an intensity that was almost unsettling. There was something about her posture, straight-backed but relaxed, hands resting calmly on her knees, that seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Who's that?" whispered Jenny, a purple belt who'd noticed Marcus's momentary distraction. "Probably someone's mom," Marcus replied under his breath, returning his attention to the lesson. "Maybe thinking about signing up for our beginner classes." But as he continued teaching, Marcus found his eyes drifting back to the woman in the corner. She hadn't moved, hadn't pulled out a phone, hadn't done anything except watch with that same penetrating focus. Her presence began to feel like a weight in the room, though he couldn't explain why. Meanwhile, Naomi Washington sat in her corner spot, taking in every detail of the class with the trained eye of someone who'd spent 3 decades studying martial arts. She'd arrived early for her friend Patricia's pickup. Patricia's daughter Amanda was one of Marcus's students, and had decided to wait inside rather than in the car. The dojo was well maintained, she'd give them that. The floors were properly cared for, the equipment was organized, and the students showed decent respect for their instructor. But as she watched Marcus demonstrate his techniques, Naomi felt a familiar twinge of concern. His form was solid, his techniques were textbook, but there was something missing. Something she'd seen too many times in her years training and competing. Marcus was performing, not teaching. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact, every explanation designed to impress rather than instruct. His students were learning the motions, but they weren't learning the art. They were memorizing choreography, not understanding combat. Naomi shifted slightly on the bench, her movements so economical they barely registered. She'd seen instructors like Marcus before, skilled enough to run a successful school, confident enough to attract students, but lacking the deep understanding that separated true masters from talented amateurs. It wasn't malicious, she knew. Many instructors fell into this trap, especially successful ones who'd built their reputation on flash rather than substance. She checked her phone discreetly. Patricia would be here in 15 minutes to collect Amanda. Naomi could wait outside, but the spring Seattle air still carried a chill, and the dojo was warm and comfortable. Besides, watching martial arts always brought her a sense of peace, even when the instruction wasn't quite what she hoped for. "Now let's try some light sparring," Marcus announced, clapping his hands together. "I want you to practice the combinations we've worked on today. Remember, control is key. We're here to learn, not to hurt each other." The students began pairing off, their movements enthusiastic if not always precise. Marcus moved among them, offering corrections and encouragement. His teaching style was energetic and engaging, and Naomi could see why his students enjoyed training with him. He made martial arts feel accessible and fun, which was valuable in its own way. As the class progressed, Marcus found himself glancing more frequently at the mysterious woman in the corner. There was something about her that nagged at him, something that made him want to demonstrate his skills more impressively. Maybe it was the way she watched, not with the eager fascination of a potential student, but with the cool assessment of someone who knew what they were looking at. "All right, everyone," Marcus called out, his voice carrying a note of showmanship that hadn't been there earlier. "Let's finish with some demonstrations. I want to show you how these techniques work against different types of opponents." He selected Kevin, his most athletic student, for a demonstration. As they began a controlled sparring session, Marcus made sure his movements were crisp and powerful. But even as he executed a perfect combination that left Kevin stumbling backward, Marcus felt oddly unsatisfied. The woman in the corner hadn't reacted at all. No impressed nod, no widening of eyes, no shift in posture that suggested she was reconsidering her initial assessment. She just continued watching with that same steady, unreadable expression. The class concluded with the traditional bow, and students began filing out in small groups, chattering excitedly about the evening's lessons. Marcus accepted their thanks and compliments with practiced grace, but his attention kept drifting to the corner where the woman still sat, apparently waiting for something. As the last of his regular students left, Marcus made his decision. He walked over to where she sat, his most welcoming smile in place. "Hi there," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Sullivan, owner and head instructor here at Dragon's Path. I noticed you watching our class tonight. Are you interested in maybe trying out some lessons?" Naomi looked up at him, her expression polite but reserved. "I'm just waiting for a friend," she said simply, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of roots far from Seattle. "Her daughter Amanda is one of your students." "Amanda? Great kid, really dedicated." Marcus's smile never wavered, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't going to be an easy sell. "Well, if you ever want to try it yourself, we have excellent beginner programs. I know martial arts can seem intimidating, but I promise we make it very welcoming for newcomers." There was a flicker of something in Naomi's eyes, amusement perhaps, or maybe something else entirely. "That's very kind of you," she said. Marcus waited for her to say more, but she didn't. The silence stretched between them, and he found himself filling it with the kind of casual boasting that usually worked well with prospective students. "I've been training for over 20 years, he said, unconsciously straightening his shoulders. "Started when I was 12, earned my black belt at 18, and I've been teaching for the past decade. Built this place from nothing into one of the most respected dojos in the city." "That's impressive," Naomi said, and Marcus couldn't tell if she meant it or was just being polite. Just then, Amanda burst through the dojo doors, her black hair still damp with sweat and her brown eyes bright with excitement. "Mom's here," she called out, then spotted Marcus talking to Naomi. "Oh, hi, Sensei Marcus. This is my mom's friend, Mrs. Washington. She's visiting from North Carolina." "Please call me Naomi," she said, standing with a fluid grace that Marcus noted despite himself. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", with a compact build that suggested she stayed in shape. But there was something about the way she moved, efficient, balanced, controlled, that made Marcus's instructor instincts take notice. "North Carolina," Marcus said, seizing on the information. "We don't get many visitors from the South. Are you enjoying Seattle?" "It's beautiful," Naomi replied. "Very different from home, but beautiful." Amanda was gathering her gear, chattering about the evening's lesson. "Sensei Marcus, did you see that kick I did? I think I'm finally getting the hang of it." "You're doing great, Amanda. Keep practicing those combinations we worked on." Marcus's attention remained partially focused on Naomi, who had picked up her gym bag and was clearly preparing to leave. Something about her calm confidence bothered him in a way he couldn't quite define. Most people who walked into his dojo were either eager to learn or obviously intimidated by the martial arts environment. Naomi seemed to be neither. She observed everything with a detached interest of someone who was familiar with what she was seeing but not particularly impressed by it. As they moved toward the door, Marcus made what he thought was a casual comment. "You know, if you're interested in seeing what real martial arts training looks like, you should come back sometime when we're doing more advanced work. Tonight was just intermediate level." Naomi paused at the door, turning back to look at him. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw something shift in her expression, a sharpening of focus, a subtle change in her posture. But then it was gone, replaced by the same polite smile she'd worn throughout their conversation. "That's very kind of you to offer," she said. "Maybe I will." And with that she was gone, following Amanda out into the Seattle evening, leaving Marcus alone in his dojo with the strangest feeling that he'd just made some kind of mistake. 3 days later, Marcus found himself thinking about the quiet woman who'd watched his class with such unnerving intensity. It was Friday evening, and Dragon's Path was buzzing with energy as his advanced students prepared for their weekly sparring session. The dojo felt different tonight, more charged, more alive, and Marcus attributed it to the excitement of having some visitors in attendance. Patricia Chun had asked if she could bring a few friends to watch Amanda's class, and Marcus had agreed readily. Having an audience always brought out the best in his students, and it was good marketing for the dojo. What he hadn't expected was for one of those friends to be Naomi Washington. She sat in the same corner spot as before, wearing similar understated clothes, dark blue jeans and a burgundy sweater that complemented her warm brown skin. Her gym bag rested beside her, and she held the same perfectly still posture that had caught his attention earlier in the week. But tonight, there were 2 other women with her, both chatting quietly and pointing out techniques as the students warmed up. "Naomi, I still can't believe you've never tried martial arts," Patricia was saying, her voice carrying across the dojo floor. "You're so naturally graceful. I bet you'd be really good at it." Marcus caught the comment as he adjusted his belt, and he found himself nodding in agreement. Naomi did move with an unusual economy of motion, but that didn't necessarily translate to martial arts ability. He'd seen plenty of dancers and athletes struggle with the specific demands of combat training. "I appreciate the vote of confidence," Naomi replied, her southern accent more pronounced in the informal setting. "But I think I'm a little old to be starting something new." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Janet, Patricia's other friend, an energetic redhead in her 50s. "My neighbor started karate at 65. Age is just a number." Marcus smiled as he overheard the conversation. This was exactly the kind of discussion he loved to intercept. He walked over to the group, his most professional demeanor in place. "Ladies, I hope you're enjoying watching our advanced class," he said warmly. "Patricia, Amanda's really coming along well. She's got natural talent." "Thank you, Sensei Marcus," Patricia beamed. "We were just trying to convince Naomi here to try a class. She keeps saying she's too old, but I think she's just being modest." Marcus turned his attention to Naomi, who was watching him with that same unreadable expression. "Patricia's right, you know. We have students of all ages and fitness levels. Martial arts isn't about being young or athletic, it's about discipline and technique. That's what I keep telling her, Janet chimed in. Show her some of those moves you were doing the other night, Sensei Marcus. Show her how easy it can be. Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride. This was his element, demonstrating his skills, proving his expertise, showing potential students what they could achieve under his guidance. He glanced around the dojo, noting that his advanced students were still warming up, giving him a perfect opportunity for an impromptu demonstration. Well, I suppose I could show you a few basic techniques, he said, his voice carrying just enough reluctance to make it seem like he was doing them a favor. Nothing too complicated, just some fundamental movements that anyone can learn. He called Kevin over, his most reliable demonstration partner. Kevin, help me show the ladies some basic defensive maneuvers. Nothing fancy, just the kind of practical stuff we teach in our beginner classes. As Marcus began demonstrating simple blocks and counters, he found himself playing to his audience. Patricia and Janet watched with appropriate amazement, gasping at the right moments and asking impressed questions about how long it took to learn such techniques. But Naomi remained silent, her dark eyes tracking every movement with that same analytical intensity. The key to martial arts, Marcus explained as he executed a textbook defense against Kevin's slow-motion attack, is understanding leverage and timing. You don't need to be stronger than your opponent, you just need to be smarter. That's incredible, Janet said. It looks so easy when you do it. That's because I've been training for over 20 years, Marcus replied, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. But with proper instruction, anyone can learn these basics. Even someone who's never thrown a punch in their life. He glanced meaningfully at Naomi, who seemed to be following the demonstration with professional interest. There was something about her focus that both intrigued and irritated him. She watched like someone who understood what she was seeing, but she couldn't possibly have that kind of experience. Could she? Naomi, why don't you try something? Patricia suggested suddenly. Just a simple move. Sensei Marcus makes it look so easy. Oh, I couldn't, Naomi said quietly, but Marcus caught something in her tone, not nervousness, but a kind of careful consideration, as if she was weighing options rather than expressing genuine reluctance. Come on, Janet encouraged. What's the worst that could happen? You're among friends. Marcus saw his opportunity. This was perfect, a chance to demonstrate his teaching abilities while gently correcting whatever misconceptions this quiet observer might have about martial arts. Plus, having a complete beginner fumble through some basic techniques would highlight his own expertise by contrast. You know what? Marcus said, his voice taking on a playful tone. Why don't we make this interesting? Naomi, how about you and I do a very light, very slow demonstration? Nothing serious, just some basic movements so you can feel what it's like. The dojo had grown quieter as his advanced students noticed the interaction. Marcus was aware of the audience, and it fed his confidence. This would be entertaining, the experienced instructor patiently guiding a complete novice through her first martial arts experience. I really don't think, Naomi began, but Patricia cut her off. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. Sensei Marcus is the best teacher. He'll take good care of you. Marcus stepped closer to the group, his smile broadening. I promise we'll go very slowly. Think of it as a free introductory lesson. Besides, you've been watching so intently, I'm curious to see what you picked up. There was a challenge in his tone now, subtle but unmistakable. He'd caught the way she observed his techniques, and part of him wanted to prove that watching and doing were two very different things. It wasn't mean-spirited, exactly, but there was definitely an element of ego involved. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus thought he saw something shift in her expression. The polite reserve was still there, but underneath it, something else was stirring. She glanced at Patricia and Janet, both of whom were watching her with encouraging smiles, then back at Marcus. All right, she said finally, her voice quiet but clear. If you're sure it's safe. Absolutely safe, Marcus assured her, gesturing toward the center of the dojo. We'll just do some very basic movements. Nothing you can't handle. As Naomi stood and moved toward the center of the mat, Marcus noticed several things about her movement that he'd missed before. She didn't walk onto the mat. She stepped onto it with the careful respect of someone who understood the significance of the training space. Her posture shifted subtly as she faced him, becoming more centered, more grounded. Now, Marcus said, loud enough for his students to hear, I want everyone to watch this. This is exactly how we introduce new students to martial arts. Slow, controlled, and completely safe. He moved into a basic fighting stance, his hands raised loosely in front of him. Naomi, I want you to just try to reach out and touch my shoulder. Don't worry about technique or anything complicated. Just reach out slowly, and I'll show you a simple defensive movement. The dojo had gone completely silent now. Even his advanced students had stopped their warm-up exercises to watch. Marcus felt a familiar thrill at being the center of attention, the expert about to demonstrate his skills. Naomi nodded and raised her hands, mirroring his stance with what Marcus thought was beginner's luck. Her positioning was actually quite good for someone who'd never trained before. Maybe she was more athletic than he'd assumed. Good, Marcus said encouragingly. Now, just reach out toward my shoulder. Nice and slow. What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for years to come, frame by frame, like a video he couldn't stop watching. Naomi's hand moved toward his shoulder, exactly as he'd requested. Marcus began his demonstration defense, a simple parry that would redirect her arm while showing the watching students how to use an opponent's momentum against them. It was a technique he'd performed thousands of times, as natural as breathing. But as his hand moved to intercept hers, something impossible happened. Her reaching hand suddenly wasn't there anymore. Instead, he felt a gentle but firm pressure against his wrist, redirecting his defensive movement in a way that left him momentarily off balance. Before he could adjust, her other hand appeared at his elbow, and with the slightest pressure, she guided him into a position where his own defensive motion had become a pathway for her to step closer. It happened so smoothly, so naturally, that for a moment Marcus didn't even realize what had occurred. He'd been countered, not aggressively, not with any show of force, but with a level of technical precision that spoke of years of training. The movement was textbook perfect, the kind of advanced technique that took most students months to master. Marcus blinked, staring at Naomi, who had returned to her original position as if nothing had happened. Her expression remained calm, almost apologetic. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I think I moved wrong. Should we try again? But Marcus wasn't fooled. What she'd done wasn't a mistake, it was a masterpiece of timing and technique. His advanced students were staring, and he could see the recognition in their eyes. They'd seen what he'd seen, and they understood the implications. That was... Marcus started, then stopped. He looked at Naomi more carefully, seeing her for the first time not as a potential student, but as someone who might know exactly what she was doing. That was very good. Have you trained before? A little, Naomi said, her voice carrying that same modest tone. A long time ago. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. A little? A long time ago? What she'd just done wasn't something you learned from a few classes or remembered from decades past. It was the kind of muscle memory that came from years of serious training. What style? He asked, his voice sharper than he'd intended. Various styles, Naomi replied. I tried different things over the years. The evasiveness of her answer only made Marcus more certain that he'd stumbled into something unexpected. His students were watching the exchange with growing interest, and he could feel the dynamic in the room shifting. What had started as a simple demonstration for beginners was becoming something else entirely. Well, Marcus said, forcing his instructor's smile back into place, you clearly retained more than you thought. That was actually quite impressive for someone who's never trained seriously. He emphasized the last phrase, making it clear that he'd caught her understatement. Naomi met his gaze steadily, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus saw a flicker of something that might have been amusement in her eyes. "Maybe we should try something a little more advanced," Marcus continued, his voice carrying a challenge that everyone in the dojo could hear. "Since you seem to remember more than you let on." The silence in the dojo was thick now, charged with anticipation. Marcus's students had formed a loose circle around them, and he could feel their attention like a physical weight. This was no longer about teaching a beginner or showing off for visitors. This had become something else entirely. "I really don't think that's necessary," Naomi said, but her stance had subtly shifted. She was no longer standing like a curious observer. She was standing like someone who was ready for whatever came next. "Oh, I think it is," Marcus said, his ego now fully engaged. "I'm curious to see just how much you remember from your little bit of training." Patricia and Janet were looking between them with growing concern, sensing that something had changed in the atmosphere. But Marcus was past caring about their comfort. His reputation was on the line now, and he needed to re-establish his authority in his own dojo. "One more technique," he said, moving into a more serious fighting stance. "Let's see how you handle something with a bit more pressure." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her making a decision. Whatever she'd been holding back, whatever she'd been hiding behind her modest demeanor, was about to be revealed. "All right," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of resignation. "But I warned you." As she moved into a proper fighting stance, not the tentative positioning of a beginner, but the balanced, grounded stance of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, Marcus realized he might have made a serious miscalculation. The entire dojo held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the quiet woman from North Carolina decided to stop hiding who she really was. The moment Naomi settled into her fighting stance, Marcus knew he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. This wasn't the uncertain positioning of someone trying to remember half-forgotten lessons from decades past. This was the automatic, unconscious balance of someone for whom combat readiness was as natural as breathing. Her feet were perfectly spaced, her weight evenly distributed between them. Her hands hung loose at her sides, but Marcus could see the potential energy coiled in her frame, like a spring under compression. Most telling of all was her breathing, slow, controlled, centered. She looked like she could stand in that position for hours without fatigue. "Jesus," whispered one of his advanced students, and Marcus silently agreed with the sentiment. But he was committed now. Half the dojo was watching. Patricia and Janet were leaning forward in anticipation, and his reputation as the unquestioned master of Dragon's Path hung in the balance. He couldn't back down, not without looking like a complete fool. "Okay," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady and professional. "Let's try a simple engagement. I'll throw a basic combination, nothing too fast or aggressive, and you just respond however feels natural." Naomi nodded once, a sharp, economical movement. "Whatever you think is best." Marcus took a deep breath and moved forward, throwing what he considered a controlled but realistic combination, a jab followed by a cross, both at about 70% speed. Fast enough to test her reactions, slow enough to maintain the pretense that this was still an educational demonstration. What happened next defied everything Marcus thought he knew about martial arts. Naomi didn't block his punches. She didn't dodge them or counter them in any conventional sense. Instead, she seemed to simply step aside from his attacking line while simultaneously moving closer to him. Her hand touched his extended arm, not grabbing, not striking, just touching, and suddenly Marcus found himself overextended and off balance. Before he could recover, she was behind his lead shoulder, her presence forcing him to turn awkwardly to face her. As he pivoted, trying to regain his fighting stance, her other hand appeared at his elbow, and with the gentlest pressure imaginable, she guided him into a stumbling step that left him facing away from her entirely. The whole sequence took maybe 2 seconds. Marcus spun back to face her, his heart pounding, and found Naomi standing exactly where she'd started, her hands at her sides, looking mildly concerned. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying across the silent dojo. "I think I moved at the wrong time. Should we try that again?" Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He'd been neutralized, not defeated, not overpowered, but simply rendered ineffective with such minimal effort that it felt like a magic trick. And she was apologizing for it. That was... He started, then stopped. What could he say? That was incredible? That was impossible? That was the kind of advanced technique that took decades to master? Any of those admissions would undermine everything he'd built at Dragon's Path. Very good, he finished weakly. You definitely remember more than you thought. But even as he spoke, Marcus was analyzing what he'd experienced. The way she'd moved wasn't from any single martial arts tradition he recognized. The footwork had elements of boxing, but the hand positioning and distance management reminded him of Aikido. The timing and spatial awareness suggested someone who'd studied multiple disciplines and integrated them into something uniquely her own. His students were murmuring among themselves now, their voices low but excited. Kevin was shaking his head in amazement, and Jenny was trying to explain to another student what she'd just witnessed. The energy in the dojo had shifted completely. What had started as Marcus demonstrating his expertise had become something else entirely. Maybe we should call it there, Naomi suggested gently. I think your students are getting distracted from their training. But Marcus couldn't let it end like this. His ego, bruised and defensive, demanded some kind of redemption. He'd spent 10 years building his reputation as the premier martial arts instructor in this part of Seattle. He couldn't let it be undermined by a middle-aged woman in street clothes who claimed to have trained a little years ago. Actually, Marcus said, his voice carrying a harder edge, I think we're just getting started. That was very impressive, but I'd like to see how you handle something with a bit more intensity. Naomi's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that might have been annoyance flicker across her features. I really don't think that's necessary. We should probably... What's wrong? Marcus interrupted, his instructor's voice carrying across the dojo and ensuring that everyone heard him. Worried you might not be able to handle real pressure? The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus knew he'd crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. He could see Patricia and Janet looking uncomfortable, his students watching with a mixture of excitement and concern, and Naomi. Naomi was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sensei Marcus, Kevin said hesitantly, maybe we should. It's fine, Kevin, Marcus said without taking his eyes off Naomi. Ms. Washington and I are just having a friendly discussion about technique. Aren't we? Naomi studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt like she was seeing straight through him. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the dojo. If you insist, she said. But I want to be clear, I tried to warn you. Something in her tone made Marcus's stomach clench, but he was too committed to back down now. He moved into his most serious fighting stance, the one he used for advanced sparring with his black belt students. This time, there would be no holding back, no educational pretense. He was going to show everyone in this dojo exactly who was the real martial artist. Let's see what you've really got, Marcus said, and launched himself forward with everything he had. Later, trying to explain what happened to his insurance company, Marcus would struggle to find words for the experience. It wasn't that Naomi was faster than him, though she was. It wasn't that she was stronger, though her techniques carried a power that seemed to come from nowhere. It was that she seemed to know what he was going to do before he did it. His first attack, a genuine full-speed combination that would have challenged any of his advanced students, never came close to landing. Naomi moved through his strikes like water flowing around stones, each of her steps perfectly timed to take her just outside his range while maintaining her own positioning. When she finally responded, it was with a technique so simple and so devastating that Marcus would spend months trying to figure out how she'd done it. She caught his extended punch not at the wrist or forearm, where he might have expected, but somehow at the shoulder, using his own forward momentum to spin him in a tight circle that left him dizzy and disoriented. As he stumbled, trying to regain his balance, Marcus felt her hand touch his back, Not pushing, not striking, just touching. But that gentle contact was perfectly placed and timed to send him sprawling across the mat in a way that looked almost choreographed. The sound of his body hitting the floor echoed through the silent dojo like a gunshot. Marcus lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. When he finally looked up, Naomi was standing over him, her hand extended to help him up, her expression genuinely concerned. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her southern accent more pronounced in her worry. "I'm so sorry. I tried to cushion the fall, but—" "I'm fine," Marcus said quickly, ignoring her offered hand and scrambling to his feet. His face was burning with embarrassment, and he could feel the eyes of his students on him. This was a disaster. This was the end of everything he'd built. But as he looked around the dojo, Marcus realized something unexpected. His students weren't looking at him with disappointment or loss of respect. They were looking at him with amazement, not because of his performance, but because of what they'd just witnessed. "Holy shit," breathed Kevin, then immediately looked embarrassed at his language. "I mean, sorry, Sensei, but that was incredible. How did she do that?" "That was like something out of a movie," Jenny added, her eyes wide. "The way she moved. I've never seen anything like it." Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and continued humiliation. His students were impressed, but not with him. They were staring at Naomi like she was some kind of mythical creature that had wandered into their ordinary dojo. "Ms. Washington," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level, "I think you may have been a bit modest about your training background." Naomi had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I did try to tell you I wasn't interested in sparring." "What style was that?" asked one of his black belt students, a woman named Carol who'd been training for 6 years. "I've never seen anything like those techniques." "Various influences," Naomi said, giving the same evasive answer she'd offered before. "I studied different things over the years." But Marcus was beginning to put pieces together. The way she moved, the sophistication of her techniques, the casual manner in which she dismantled his best efforts. This wasn't someone who'd taken a few karate classes in college. This was someone who'd spent serious time learning from serious teachers. "Where did you train?" he asked, his curiosity now overcoming his embarrassment. Naomi hesitated, glancing toward Patricia and Janet, who were watching the exchange with fascination. "Different places. I moved around a lot when I was younger." "Professional training?" Marcus pressed. Another hesitation. "Something like that." The evasiveness was answer enough. Marcus felt a chill as he realized he might have just challenged someone who operated on a completely different level than his commercial dojo. Someone who'd learned martial arts not as a hobby or fitness activity, but as something far more serious. "Look," Naomi said, seeming to sense his growing realization, this was a mistake. "I should have declined your invitation to spar. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone or cause problems. I just came to watch Amanda's class." But the damage was done. Marcus could see it in his students' faces, hear it in their excited whispers. They'd just witnessed something that had shattered their understanding of what martial arts could be. And while that might be educational for them, it was potentially devastating for him. "No harm done," Marcus said, forcing a smile. "It was educational. For all of us." Naomi nodded, but she was already moving toward her gym bag, clearly preparing to leave. Patricia and Janet flanked her, both talking excitedly about what they'd just seen, but Naomi seemed eager to escape the attention. As she gathered her things, Marcus found himself studying her with new eyes. The understated clothes, the quiet demeanor, the way she tried to avoid this entire situation, it all made sense now. She wasn't hiding her abilities out of modesty. She was hiding them because she understood exactly what kind of disruption her presence could cause in a place like this. "Ms. Washington," Marcus called out as she headed toward the door. Would you consider maybe sharing some techniques with my advanced students? I think they could learn a lot from you." Naomi paused at the door, turning back to look at him. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw something like sympathy in her expression. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I think it's better if I stick to watching from now on." And with that, she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with his students and the uncomfortable realization that everything he thought he knew about martial arts had just been called into question by a quiet woman from North Carolina who moved like water and struck like lightning. The dojo remained silent for a long moment after she left, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Kevin spoke up. "Sensei Marcus," he said hesitantly, "who the hell was that?" Marcus looked around at his students, his dedicated, loyal students who'd been training with him for years, who trusted him to teach them everything they needed to know about martial arts. They were all staring at him expectantly, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of what they'd just seen. "I honestly have no idea," Marcus admitted, and for the first time in his teaching career, he felt completely out of his depth. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for Seattle in late March. Marcus stood in his empty dojo at 6 a.m., going through his solo training routine with mechanical precision, but his mind was elsewhere. Every technique he practiced reminded him of how effortlessly Naomi had countered similar movements the night before. His punches felt slow, his footwork clumsy, his balance questionable. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that moment when she'd touched his shoulder and sent him spinning like a child's top. The worst part wasn't the physical defeat, it was the gentle, almost apologetic way she'd done it, as if she were dealing with an overeager student rather than a peer. The front door chime interrupted his brooding. Marcus looked up, expecting to see one of his early morning private lesson students, but instead found Detective Ray Morrison pushing through the entrance, shaking rain from his jacket. "Morning, Marcus," Ray said, his weathered face serious. "Sorry to bother you so early, but we've got a situation." Ray had been coming to Dragon's Path for 3 years, ever since his doctor told him he needed to find a less destructive way to manage stress than drinking. At 52, he was one of Marcus's most dedicated adult students, and more importantly, he'd become a friend. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, grabbing a towel to wipe sweat from his face. "Break-ins," Ray said grimly. 3 martial arts schools hit in the past 2 weeks. Same pattern each time. They trash the place, steal equipment, and spray paint gang tags all over the walls. "We think it's some kind of initiation thing for the new guys in the Crimson Wolves." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Crimson Wolves were a relatively new gang that had been expanding their territory throughout Capitol Hill and the surrounding neighborhoods. Unlike the older, more established gangs that mostly kept to themselves, the Wolves seemed to take pleasure in random acts of destruction and intimidation. "You think they might hit us?" Marcus asked. "I think you're exactly the kind of target they're looking for," Ray said bluntly. "Successful business, respectable reputation, lots of expensive equipment. Plus, hitting a martial arts school gives them street cred, shows they're not afraid of people who know how to fight." Marcus walked over to his front windows, looking out at the quiet street. Dragon's Path was located in a decent part of town, but it wasn't immune to crime. He'd invested everything he had into this place, and the thought of losing it to random violence made his chest tight. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "Honestly? Extra security. Maybe think about closing early for a few weeks until we can get a handle on this. I know it's not ideal for your business, but—" The door chime sounded again, and both men turned to see Amanda Chun pushing through the entrance, followed by Patricia and, to Marcus's surprise, Naomi. "Oh," Patricia said, noticing the 2 men. "I'm sorry, are we interrupting something?" "Not at all," Marcus said quickly. "Ray, this is Patricia Chen and her daughter Amanda, and—" He hesitated, unsure how to introduce Naomi after what had happened the previous night. "Naomi Washington," she said simply, extending her hand to Ray. "I'm visiting from North Carolina." Ray shook her hand, his cop instincts automatically assessing her the way he did everyone he met. "Ray Morrison, Seattle PD. Nice to meet you." "Amanda left her water bottle here last night," Patricia explained. We were just going to grab it real quick. Of course, Marcus said. Amanda, it's probably in the changing area. As Amanda scampered off to retrieve her bottle, an awkward silence settled over the group. Marcus could feel Naomi's presence like a weight in the room, and he wondered if she was thinking about their encounter the previous evening. Everything okay? Patricia asked, sensing the tension between Marcus and Ray. You both look pretty serious. Ray glanced at Marcus, who nodded. We were just discussing some security concerns. There have been some break-ins at martial arts schools in the area. Break-ins. Naomi's voice carried a note of concern. What kind of break-ins? Ray explained the situation while Amanda returned with her water bottle. As he described the pattern of attacks, Marcus noticed that Naomi was listening with the kind of focused attention he'd observed the night before, the intensity of someone who processed information differently than most people. Gang initiation, she said when Ray finished. It wasn't a question. That's our working theory, Ray confirmed. You sound like you're familiar with this kind of thing. I've seen similar patterns before, Naomi said carefully. They escalate quickly once they start. How much time do you think Marcus has before they target this place? The casual use of his first name surprised Marcus, as did the way she seemed to automatically assume the threat was real and immediate. Most people would have offered reassurance or suggested the gang might move on to easier targets. Hard to say, Ray admitted. Could be tonight, could be next week. The timing seems random, but the target selection isn't. What about police protection? Patricia asked. Ray's expression was apologetic. We're doing extra patrols, but we can't station someone here full-time. The department doesn't have the resources. Marcus felt a familiar surge of frustration. He'd built Dragon's Path from nothing, poured his heart and savings into creating something meaningful, and now it could all be destroyed by a group of teenage criminals looking to prove themselves. There are private security companies, he said, thinking out loud. But the cost would probably put you out of business anyway, Ray finished. I know. It's a hell of a situation. What about volunteers? Amanda spoke up suddenly. Like people who could maybe stay here at night to keep watch. Amanda, Patricia said gently, it's not that simple. This could be dangerous. But Mr. Marcus is always saying that martial arts is about protecting what matters, Amanda persisted. This place matters to all of us. Marcus felt a warmth in his chest at the girl's words, but Ray was already shaking his head. I appreciate the sentiment, kid, but civilians can't. What if they weren't civilians? Naomi interrupted quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was studying the dojo's layout with the same analytical attention she'd paid to Marcus's techniques the night before. What do you mean? Ray asked. Security doesn't have to be about confrontation, Naomi said. Sometimes it's about deterrence. Making a target look too difficult or too risky to be worth the trouble. You're talking about making them think the place is better protected than it actually is, Ray said, his cop brain following her logic. I'm talking about making sure it actually is better protected, Naomi corrected. But in a way that doesn't require confrontation or put anyone at unnecessary risk. Marcus found himself leaning forward despite his lingering embarrassment from the previous night. What did you have in mind? Naomi walked over to the front windows, looking out at the street with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to assess tactical situations. The layout is actually pretty good. Limited access points, good sight lines, solid construction. The main vulnerability is that it's obviously empty at night. Right, Ray said slowly. So you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that it shouldn't look empty, Naomi said. Lights on, movement visible from the street, clear signs that someone's here who knows what they're doing. But that would require someone actually being here, Marcus pointed out. And like Ray said, civilians can't. I'm not a civilian, Naomi said simply. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Ray's cop instincts were obviously pinging, and Marcus felt his stomach clench as pieces began falling into place. Military? Ray asked. Among other things, Naomi replied. I'm qualified to provide security services in all 50 states. Patricia was staring at her friend with obvious surprise. Naomi, you never told me you were. It doesn't usually come up in conversation, Naomi said with a slight smile. I'm retired now, but I maintain my certifications, and I have relevant experience. Marcus felt like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. The quiet confidence, the way she'd moved during their sparring session, the analytical manner in which she assessed situations, it all made sense now. What kind of relevant experience? Ray asked, his detective instincts fully engaged. The kind that taught me how to make sure problems don't escalate into violence, Naomi said. Which is what everyone here wants, right? To keep this place safe without anyone getting hurt. Wait, Amanda said excitedly. Are you saying you could protect the dojo? Like stay here at night and watch for bad guys? Amanda, Patricia said warningly. It's okay, Naomi said. And yes, that's essentially what I'm suggesting. Not because I'm looking for excitement or trying to play hero, but because Marcus has built something valuable here, and I have the skills to help protect it. Marcus stared at her, his mind racing. Yesterday, she'd been a mysterious observer who'd humiliated him in front of his students. Now she was offering to put herself at risk to protect his life's work. I can't ask you to do that, he said. You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you an apology for last night. I was out of line. You weren't out of line, Naomi said gently. You were being protective of your school and your students. I respect that, even if your methods were a bit direct. Ray was looking back and forth between them like he was watching a tennis match. Okay, I feel like I'm missing some context here. What happened last night? Marcus challenged me to spar, Naomi explained. It didn't go the way he expected. She kicked his ass, Amanda added helpfully, earning a sharp look from her mother. Amanda. What? It was awesome. She moved like she was dancing, and Sensei Marcus couldn't even touch her. Ray's eyebrows went up, and he looked at Marcus with new interest. Really? Marcus felt his face burning again, but forced himself to meet Ray's gaze. Really? She's considerably more skilled than I initially realized. Considerably more skilled than anyone initially realized, Patricia added. Naomi, why didn't you ever tell me you were some kind of martial arts expert? Because I'm not, Naomi said. I'm someone who learned how to defend herself and others when necessary. There's a difference. But Marcus was beginning to understand that the difference was probably more semantic than practical. Everything about Naomi, from her movement patterns to her tactical thinking to her calm acceptance of potentially dangerous situations, suggested someone who'd operated in environments where violence was a professional concern, not a recreational activity. Okay, Ray said slowly. Let's say I buy into this idea. What exactly are you proposing? Simple deterrence, Naomi replied. I stay here after hours, maintain a visible presence, and make it clear to anyone watching that this isn't an easy target. Most gang initiations are about picking fights they know they can win. If this place looks like it might fight back effectively, they'll probably move on to something easier. And if they don't? Marcus asked. Then I call Detective Morrison and let the professionals handle it, Naomi said. I'm not talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about professional security services. Ray was nodding slowly. It could work. Gang kids aren't stupid, they're cowards. They want easy victories, not real fights. If they think someone's here who knows what they're doing, they'll go find a softer target, Marcus finished. Exactly. Marcus looked around his dojo, imagining it trashed and vandalized, his students too scared to return, years of work destroyed in a single night of random violence. Then he looked at Naomi, who was studying the windows and doorways with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to think defensively. "I can't pay you what professional security would cost," he said honestly. "I'm not asking for payment," Naomi replied. "I'm asking for something to do while I'm visiting Seattle. Patricia and Janet work during the day, Amanda's in school, and I'm not much for tourist attractions. This would give me a purpose." "Naomi," Patricia said carefully, "are you sure about this? I mean, these are gang members we're talking about. Real criminals." "I've dealt with real criminals before," Naomi said simply. "Trust me, Patricia. I know what I'm doing." The conviction in her voice left no room for doubt. Marcus found himself looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and continued embarrassment. Last night, he'd challenged her to prove his superiority. Now she was offering to risk her safety to protect everything he cared about. "There's just one condition," Naomi continued. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "If I'm going to be spending nights here, I'd like to understand the space better. Maybe do some light training, get a feel for the equipment and layout." She paused, and Marcus caught something that might have been amusement in her expression. "Think you might be willing to help me with that?" Marcus realized she was offering him a chance at redemption, an opportunity to interact with her as a fellow martial artist rather than an embarrassed student who'd been schooled by a superior opponent. "I think that could be arranged," he said, and for the first time since last night, he felt something other than humiliation when he looked at her. Ray was pulling out his phone. "Okay, if we're doing this, I need to make some calls. Get you properly registered as a security consultant. Make sure everything's legal and above board." "Naomi," Amanda said excitedly, "are you really going to stay here and fight bad guys?" "I'm going to stay here and hopefully make sure there's no fighting at all," Naomi corrected gently. "The best kind of security is the kind where nothing happens." But even as she spoke, Marcus could see her continuing to assess the dojo's defensive possibilities. Whatever Naomi's background was, she was already thinking several steps ahead, planning for contingencies he probably hadn't even considered. For the first time since Ray had delivered his warning, Marcus felt like Dragon's Path might actually survive this threat. And strangely, he found himself looking forward to spending time with the woman who'd so thoroughly humbled him the night before. Maybe, he thought, there was more than one way to learn from a superior opponent. That evening, Marcus found himself alone in the dojo with Naomi for the second time in 2 days, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of the charged tension of their unexpected sparring match, there was a professional calm as she methodically examined every corner of the space. "The back exit needs better lighting," she said, making notes on a small pad. "And these windows are too easy to break quietly. We'll need motion sensors positioned here and here." She pointed to strategic locations with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Marcus watched her work, still trying to reconcile this tactical professional with the quiet woman who'd sat in his corner yesterday. "How long were you in the military?" he asked. 12 years, she replied without looking up from her notes. "Army. Started as an MP, ended up in some more specialized units." "Specialized how?" Naomi glanced at him, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "Personal security. High-value targets in uncertain environments. I spent a lot of time making sure important people stayed alive in places where other people wanted them dead." The casual way she said it made Marcus's stomach tighten. He'd known she was skilled, but this was something else entirely. "Where?" "Wherever the army sent me. Afghanistan, Iraq, couple of African countries you probably couldn't find on a map." She moved to test the locks on the equipment storage. "After I got out, I did private security for a few years. Corporate executives, politicians, celebrities who'd gotten death threats." "What made you stop?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on the storage room door. "I got tired of violence being the answer to everything. Started teaching martial arts instead, trying to show people that real strength comes from discipline and restraint, not from being the toughest person in the room. Is that why you moved to North Carolina? I moved to North Carolina because my daughter needed stability, she said simply. She was 8 when I left the service, and she'd spent too many years with mommy deployed overseas. I wanted to give her a normal life. Marcus felt a jolt of surprise. You have a daughter? Had, Naomi corrected, her voice becoming very quiet. Alexis. She would have been 22 this year. The past tense hit Marcus like a physical blow. He watched Naomi's shoulders tense slightly, saw her fingers tighten on her notepad, and realized he'd stumbled into something much deeper than professional background. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. Car accident, Naomi said, still not looking at him. 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. She took a deep breath and turned back to her assessment of the dojo. That's why I'm here, actually. Patricia was Alexis's roommate in college. They stayed close after graduation, and when Patricia heard I was struggling, she invited me to come visit. The pieces were falling into place now, not just Naomi's skills, but her presence here, her willingness to help a stranger protect something he cared about. Marcus realized she wasn't just offering professional security services. She was looking for a way to channel grief into something constructive. She must have been very special, he said carefully. She was everything, Naomi replied. Smart, funny, kind. She was going to be a teacher. Elementary school. She always said she wanted to help kids the way some of her teachers had helped her when I was deployed. The pain in her voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Marcus found himself thinking about his own relationship with his students, how devastated he'd be if something happened to any of them. Is that why you know so much about martial arts? He asked. You taught her. I tried to, Naomi said with a slight smile. She was more interested in books than fighting. But she humored me, came to class, learned enough to make me feel better about her safety. The smile faded. Didn't matter in the end. All my training, all my experience keeping people safe in war zones, and I couldn't protect her from some idiot who'd had too many beers. Marcus wanted to say something comforting, but everything that came to mind sounded hollow. Instead, he found himself asking, what style did you teach? Mixed disciplines, Naomi said. Army combatives gave me the foundation, but I studied whatever I could get my hands on. Krav Maga, jiu-jitsu, boxing, traditional karate, even some Filipino stick fighting. When you're responsible for keeping people alive, you learn to use whatever works. That's why you were able to counter everything I threw at you last night. That's why I was able to counter everything you threw at me in the first 10 seconds, she corrected with a hint of amusement. Marcus, you're a skilled martial artist, but you fight like someone who learned in a controlled environment. Your techniques are textbook perfect, but you telegraph your intentions, and you assume your opponent will respond predictably. The criticism should have stung, but coming from her, it felt more like professional feedback. What do you mean? Watch, Naomi said, moving to the center of the mat. Throw the same combination you used on me yesterday. The jab, cross, roundhouse kick sequence. Marcus hesitated. I don't want to. You're not going to hurt me, she said with quiet confidence. Just show me the combination at normal speed. Marcus moved into position and began the sequence, his movements crisp and powerful. But before his jab was halfway to its target, Naomi had shifted slightly to her left, her right hand coming up in a subtle deflection that sent his punch harmlessly past her shoulder. When he followed with the cross, she stepped inside his range, her body positioning making it impossible for him to generate power. The roundhouse kick never had a chance. She was already behind his center line, her hand resting gently on his back. See, she said as he turned to face her. You committed to the first technique before you knew how I'd respond. In a real fight, that's how you get hurt. How do you avoid that? By not fighting unless you have to, she said immediately. But when you do have to fight, you fight like your life depends on it, because it probably does. She moved back to the center of the mat, her posture relaxed but alert. The difference between martial arts as a discipline and martial arts as a survival skill is that survival doesn't care about looking good or following rules. It only cares about going home alive. "Show me," Marcus said. Naomi studied him for a moment, as if assessing whether he was ready for what she was about to demonstrate. "Okay. But this time, don't pull your punches. I want you to really try to hit me." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because you're a guest in my dojo. Because you're a woman. Because you're afraid you might actually succeed," she interrupted, but not unkindly. "Marcus, I've been hit by people a lot bigger and stronger than you. I've been shot at, blown up, and beaten half to death by experts in violence. If you hold back because you think I can't handle it, you're not showing me respect, you're showing me pity." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, but it was different from the way he'd challenged her yesterday. This wasn't about ego or proving superiority. It was about learning. "All right," he said, moving into his fighting stance. "But if I hurt you—" "You won't," she said simply. Marcus launched himself forward, throwing everything he had into a straight right hand aimed at her solar plexus. It was a technique he'd practiced thousands of times, fast and powerful and accurate. He never saw her move. One moment he was throwing the punch, the next he was on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that would have been excruciating if she'd applied any real pressure. The transition had been so smooth, so effortless, that he wasn't even sure what had happened. "Combat isn't about techniques," Naomi said, her voice calm and conversational despite the fact that she had him completely immobilized. "It's about timing, distance, and leverage. You were thinking about throwing a punch. I was thinking about where you'd be when the punch was over." She released him and stepped back, offering her hand to help him up. The difference between sport fighting and survival fighting is that sport fighting is about winning. Survival fighting is about ending the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible. Marcus accepted her help getting to his feet, his mind reeling. He'd been training for 20 years, had fought in dozens of tournaments, had earned his black belt from legitimate instructors. But watching Naomi move was like seeing a different species of martial artist entirely. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. "Everywhere," she said. "The army taught me the basics, but real combat instruction came from working with special operations units. Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon. When you're protecting assets in hostile territory, you learn from the best." "And after the military?" "I kept learning. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from a former UFC fighter, Krav Maga from Israeli Defense Force instructors, boxing from a guy who'd trained world champions. When your job is keeping people alive, you don't stop improving." Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what he'd challenged yesterday. Naomi wasn't just skilled, she was operating at a level that most martial artists never even approached. "Why didn't you tell me any of this yesterday?" he asked. "Because you didn't ask," she said simply. "You made assumptions about what I was capable of based on how I looked, and then you challenged me to prove you wrong. I don't usually volunteer information about my background unless it's relevant." It seemed pretty relevant. "Only because you made it relevant," she pointed out. "If you just said hello and maybe asked about my interest in martial arts, I would have told you I'd trained a little. We could have had a normal conversation instead of turning it into a demonstration." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks again. "I was showing off." "You were protecting your territory," Naomi corrected. "I get it. This place is important to you, and I was an unknown quantity. But Marcus, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. What you've built here is genuinely impressive." She gestured around the dojo. "Your students respect you, your techniques are solid, and you've created a space where people can learn and grow. That's not something to be taken lightly." Even if my fighting skills are apparently amateur hour? Your fighting skills are exactly what they should be for what you do, she said. You're not training warriors for combat. You're teaching people self-confidence, discipline, and basic self-defense. Different goals require different approaches. Marcus found himself looking at his dojo through her eyes, not as a place where he had to prove his superiority, but as a community space where people came to better themselves. Maybe that was worth more than being the toughest person in the room. "Will you teach me?" he asked suddenly. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" "How to fight like that. How to see 3 moves ahead. How to end a conflict before it starts." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. Because I want to be better. Because if I'm going to protect this place and my students, I need to understand what real combat looks like. And if I teach you these things, what will you do with them? "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Hopefully nothing. But if something happens, if those gang members come here or if someone threatens my students, I want to be ready." Naomi studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "Learning to fight the way I fight changes you," she said finally. "It's not just about techniques. It's about accepting that there are people in the world who want to hurt you, and that sometimes the only way to stop them is to hurt them first. Once you cross that line, you can't go back." "Have you crossed that line?" "Many times," she said quietly. "In the army, in private security, and once since then. The drunk driver who killed Alexis wasn't the only one who died that night." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what she was telling him. "The other driver," he said, "died at the scene," Naomi confirmed. "Officially, it was from the impact. But he was alive when I got to the wreckage. He was alive when I found him trapped in his car, conscious and aware of what he'd done. He was alive when I made the choice not to help him get out." Marcus stared at her, trying to process what he'd just heard. "You let him die." "I watched him die," she corrected, "while my daughter was dying 50 feet away. I had maybe 60 seconds to choose who to try to save, and I chose to hold my baby girl's hand while she took her last breath instead of pulling a killer from burning wreckage." The raw pain in her voice was devastating. Marcus could see the weight of that choice in her eyes, the way it had carved lines around her mouth and added gray to her hair. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't be sorry," Naomi said. "Be sure. Because if I teach you what I know, you'll be capable of making the same kinds of choices. And once you can make those choices, you'll be responsible for making them correctly." Marcus looked around his dojo again, thinking about his students, about the life he'd built, about the gangs that might come to destroy it all. Did he really want to carry the kind of knowledge that Naomi carried? Did he want to be the kind of person who could watch someone die and choose not to help? "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Good," Naomi replied. "That's the right answer." The wrong answer would have been yes or no without consideration. People who make those kinds of decisions quickly usually make them badly. She began packing up her notes and equipment. "For now, let's focus on keeping this place safe without anyone getting hurt. Maybe that'll be enough." As she moved toward the door, Marcus called out to her, "Naomi." She turned back. "Thank you. For telling me about Alexis. For offering to help protect this place. For everything." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "You're welcome, Marcus. See you tomorrow." After she left, Marcus stood alone in his dojo, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the weight of new understanding. He'd thought he was a martial artist, but he was beginning to realize he'd been playing at something that others lived and died by. The question was, did he want to learn the difference? 3 days later, Marcus arrived at the dojo to find Naomi already there, sitting in the same corner spot where he'd first seen her. But this time, she wasn't alone. A young woman with bright purple hair and multiple piercings was beside her, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. And then he had the nerve to tell me that my aesthetic choices weren't appropriate for a professional environment, the young woman was saying, her voice carrying the indignation of someone who'd been repeatedly underestimated. I'm like, dude, I can code circles around half your dev team, but sure, let's focus on my hair color. Naomi was listening with the patient attention of someone who'd heard similar stories before. What did you tell him? I told him I'd change my hair color the day he learned to write code that didn't crash every time someone looked at it wrong, the young woman said with a grin. Then I fixed 3 of his bugs in about 20 minutes, just to make the point. Marcus approached them, curious about this new addition to what had become their evening routine. Over the past few days, Naomi had been arriving early to continue her security assessment, and Marcus had found himself looking forward to their conversations almost as much as teaching his classes. Hi, he said, extending his hand to the newcomer. I'm Marcus Sullivan. Zoe-chan, she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip. Amanda's older sister. I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope, Marcus said, then looked at Naomi. I didn't know Amanda had a sister. Zoe's been away at MIT, Naomi explained. She's visiting for spring break. Computer science major, Zoe added, with a minor in making people uncomfortable by existing in spaces where they don't expect to see someone like me. Marcus laughed, immediately liking her directness. I can relate to that. I spent years trying to convince people that martial arts instructors could be thoughtful and intellectual, not just muscle-bound meatheads. See, Zoe said to Naomi. I told you he seemed cool. Cool enough, Naomi replied with a slight smile. Zoe was just telling me about her internship at a tech startup. More like my former internship, Zoe corrected. Turns out that being the most qualified person in the room doesn't matter if you don't look like what they think a programmer should look like. Their loss, Marcus said, and meant it. There was something about Zoe's confidence that reminded him of his best students, the ones who'd learned to find strength in being different rather than trying to fit in. That's what I keep telling her, Naomi said. But it's hard when you're dealing with that kind of prejudice every day. You should have seen her when she was Amanda's age, Zoe said, settling back in her chair. She used to get so frustrated when people would assume she was just another army wife tagging along while her husband did the real work. You knew Naomi in the military? Marcus asked. I was about 10 when she was stationed at Fort Bragg, Zoe explained. My dad was Army too, stationed at the same base. Naomi and Mom became friends, and she used to babysit me and Amanda sometimes when both our parents were deployed. Marcus looked at Naomi with new interest. You never mentioned you knew the Chens that long. Patricia and I go way back, Naomi said simply. We kept in touch after I got out, and when... She paused, glancing at Zoe. When things got difficult for me, she was one of the people who helped me through it. Zoe's expression softened. Aunt Naomi's been through a lot, she said quietly. But she's the strongest person I know. Aunt Naomi? Marcus asked. Honorary aunt, Naomi clarified. I've been part of their family for so long that the kids started calling me that when they were little. It stuck. She taught me how to throw a punch when I was 12, Zoe said with a grin. Some kids at school were giving me trouble about my parents being immigrants, and she said if I was going to be different, I might as well be dangerous too. And did you use it? Once, Zoe said. Kid named Brett Patterson thought it would be funny to push me into a locker and call me a chink. I broke his nose. Zoe. Naomi said, but she was trying not to smile. What? You always told me that bullies only understand one language. Besides, Brett Patterson deserved it. He's probably still a racist piece of garbage, but at least he learned not to mess with me. Marcus found himself laughing at the matter-of-fact way she described it. What did your parents say? Mom was horrified, Zoe said. Dad was secretly proud. Aunt Naomi gave me a lecture about using violence responsibly and then took me out for ice cream. Violence should always be a last resort, Naomi said, but her tone was fond rather than disapproving. But sometimes it's the only resort that works. That's what I've been trying to figure out, Marcus said. When is it worth it to escalate? When do you choose to fight instead of walking away? When walking away means someone else gets hurt, Naomi replied without hesitation. When the cost of not fighting is higher than the cost of fighting. But how do you know? Marcus pressed. How do you calculate that kind of cost? Naomi was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. Experience, she said finally. And mistakes. Lots of mistakes. Tell him about the convoy, Zoe said suddenly. Zoe. No, seriously. He needs to hear this. Zoe turned to Marcus. This is a story that really shows what she means about calculating costs. Naomi sighed, but Marcus could see she was considering it. It's not a happy story, she warned. I'm listening, Marcus said. Afghanistan, 2018, Naomi began. I was part of a security detail for a convoy carrying medical supplies to a village clinic. Intelligence said the route was clear, but about halfway there, we got reports of possible IED activity ahead. She paused, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on her knee. The convoy commander wanted to turn back, wait for EOD to clear the route. But the clinic was expecting us, and they were almost out of antibiotics. Without those supplies, kids were going to die. So what did you do? I made a choice, Naomi said quietly. I volunteered to scout ahead on foot, check for devices or ambush positions. If the route was clear, the convoy would follow. If not, we'd find another way. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Marcus said. It was, Naomi agreed. But it was less dangerous than sending the whole convoy into a potential trap, and it was less dangerous than letting children die from preventable infections. What happened? I found 2 IEDs, Naomi said. Both positioned to hit the convoy at its most vulnerable point. I also found the triggerman, a teenager who couldn't have been more than 15, hiding in a drainage culvert with a cell phone detonator. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What did you do? I had a choice, Naomi said. I could take him out, ensure the convoy's safety, complete the mission. Or I could try to talk to him, try to understand why a kid was willing to blow up medical supplies. And I chose to talk, Naomi said. Spent 20 minutes in that culvert, speaking broken Arabic and using hand gestures, trying to communicate with this scared kid who'd been told we were his enemies. Did it work? For about 10 minutes, Naomi said with a sad smile. He told me his name was Khalil. He'd been recruited by local militia, promised money for his family if he helped stop the invaders. He was terrified, crying, saying he didn't want to hurt anyone but his little sister needed medicine and this was the only way to get it. So you convinced him to stand down? I convinced him to disarm the IEDs and come with me to the convoy, Naomi said. I thought maybe we could help his family, maybe show him that we weren't the monsters he'd been told we were. Marcus waited for her to continue, but she'd gone quiet. Zoe reached over and touched her arm gently. What happened? Marcus asked softly. Sniper, Naomi said simply. Someone had been watching the whole time, waiting to see if Khalil would follow through. When he started walking toward the convoy with me, they shot him. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. They killed him. Shot him in the back, Naomi confirmed. Kid died in my arms, apologizing for not being strong enough to do what they'd asked him to do. I'm sorry, Marcus said, the words feeling inadequate. The point, Naomi said, is that I made a choice based on what I thought was right, what I thought would minimize harm. And I was wrong. If I'd taken him out immediately, he'd still be dead, but at least he wouldn't have died thinking he'd failed his family. But you tried to save him, Marcus protested. You showed him compassion. I showed him false hope, Naomi corrected. I made him believe there was another way when there wasn't. Sometimes the merciful choice is also the cruel choice. Marcus struggled to process what she was telling him. How do you live with that? By remembering that the alternative was letting a convoy full of medical supplies get blown up, Naomi said. By remembering that because of what happened to Khalil, I was able to disarm those IEDs and get antibiotics to kids who needed them. By remembering that every choice has a cost, and sometimes the best you can do is choose the cost you can live with. That's horrible, Marcus said. That's war, Naomi replied. That's what happens when violence becomes the primary language of communication. That's why I try so hard to teach people there are other ways to solve problems. But you still carry a gun, Marcus pointed out. Because sometimes there aren't other ways, Naomi said. Because sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and those who want to hurt them is someone willing to make the hard choices. Zoe had been listening to this exchange with growing intensity. That's why she's helping you, she said to Marcus. That's why she's willing to teach you how to fight properly. Because she sees something in you that reminds her of herself before she learned how complicated the world really is. What do you mean? Marcus asked. You still believe you can protect people without becoming something you don't want to be, Zoe said. You still think there's a way to be strong without being cruel. She wants to help you keep believing that for as long as possible. Marcus looked at Naomi, seeing her in a new light. Is that true? Partly, Naomi said. But it's also because I see what you've built here, and I think it's worth protecting. This place, these students, the way you've created a space where people can learn to be strong without learning to be violent. That's rare. That's valuable. Even if I'm not as skilled as I thought I was. Especially because you're not as skilled as you thought you were, Naomi said with a slight smile. Skilled fighters are common. Good teachers are rare. People who can inspire others to be better than they thought they could be are even rarer. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with recognition. This woman had seen things he couldn't imagine, had made choices that would have broken most people, and yet she was sitting in his dojo, offering to help him become better at something she'd spent years trying to leave behind. Why are you really here, Naomi? He asked quietly. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on her hands. Because I'm tired of being alone with what I know, she said finally. Because I'm tired of being the only person in the room who understands what real violence looks like. Because maybe if I can teach someone else to be strong without being broken, I can prove to myself that it's possible. And if it's not possible, then at least I'll have tried, she said. And at least you'll be better prepared for whatever comes next. What do you think is coming next? I don't know, Naomi admitted. But I've lived long enough to know that peace is temporary and violence is patient. Something will test you eventually, and when it does, you'll need to be ready. Will you be ready? Marcus asked. Naomi met his eyes, and for a moment, he saw past the controlled exterior to something raw and vulnerable underneath. I don't know, she said honestly. I've been running from who I used to be for 3 years. I came here thinking I could hide from it, but maybe hiding isn't the answer. Maybe the answer is finding a way to use what you know for something good, Marcus suggested. Maybe, Naomi said. Or maybe the answer is accepting that some people are meant to be weapons, and the best we can do is make sure we're pointed in the right direction. You're not a weapon, Marcus said firmly. You're a person who's been through things that would destroy most people, and you're still here, still trying to help others. That's not what weapons do. Isn't it? Naomi asked. Weapons protect what matters. They deter threats. They solve problems that can't be solved any other way. Maybe being a weapon isn't the worst thing you can be. But it's not all you are, Zoe interjected. You're also the person who taught me that being different was something to be proud of. You're the person who held my hand when I was scared of starting college. You're the person who calls me every week to make sure I'm eating enough vegetables. Vegetables are important, Naomi said with a small smile. See, Zoe said to Marcus. Weapons don't worry about whether college students are getting proper nutrition. People do. People who care about other people do. Marcus found himself smiling too, charmed by the obvious affection between these two women. She's right, you know. You're not just what you've had to become. You're also what you choose to be. And what do you choose to be? Naomi asked him. Marcus thought about it, looking around his dojo at the equipment and mats and mirrors that had become his life's work. I choose to be someone who helps people find their strength without losing their humanity, he said finally. I choose to be someone who protects what matters without becoming something I can't live with. That's a good choice, Naomi said. A difficult one, but a good one. Will you help me figure out how to do it? I'll try, she said. But Marcus, you need to understand that once you start down this path, there's no going back. Once you know what you're capable of, you can't unknow it. Once you've seen what people are capable of doing to each other, you can't unsee it. I know, Marcus said. I've been thinking about it for days, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I'd rather know and be prepared than be ignorant and vulnerable. Even if it changes you. Even if it changes me, Marcus confirmed. Because the alternative is letting other people get hurt because I wasn't strong enough to protect them. Naomi studied his face for a long moment, as if looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finally, she nodded. All right. We'll start tomorrow. But we start with the hard conversations first. What kind of hard conversations? The kind where you tell me exactly what you're willing to do to protect this place and these people, she said. The kind where you look me in the eye and tell me whether you're prepared to hurt someone who's trying to hurt your students. The kind where you decide what lines you won't cross, even if crossing them might save lives. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't back down. I'm ready for those conversations. No, Naomi said quietly. You're not. Nobody ever is. But you're willing to have them anyway, and that's what matters. As if summoned by some invisible signal, Amanda burst through the dojo doors, her school backpack slung over her shoulder and her face bright with excitement. Zoe, Mom said you'd be here. How was your first day back? Educational, Zoe said, standing to hug her sister. I learned that some people are idiots, but also that some people are worth getting to know. That's basically every day, Amanda said with the wisdom of a teenager who'd learned to navigate the world with optimism and caution in equal measure. Your sister's very wise, Marcus said to Zoe. She gets it from our parents, Zoe replied. They taught us that you can't control how people see you, but you can control how you respond to how they see you. And how do you choose to respond? By being so good at what I do that they have to respect me even if they don't like me, Zoe said with a grin. By being undeniably competent in undeniably uncomfortable ways. I like that philosophy, Marcus said. Me too, Naomi added. It served her well so far. As the Chen sisters began catching up, Marcus found himself watching Naomi with new understanding. She wasn't just a skilled fighter or a security consultant or even a grieving mother. She was a person who'd learned to find family in unexpected places, who'd maintained connections across years and distances, who'd chosen to invest in other people's futures even when her own felt uncertain. Maybe that was the real lesson she had to teach him, not just how to fight, but how to remain human while doing it. The next evening, Marcus arrived at the dojo 30 minutes early, his stomach tight with nervous energy. He'd spent the day thinking about Naomi's words, about the hard conversations they needed to have, about what he was truly willing to do to protect his students. The theoretical had suddenly become frighteningly real. He was setting up training mats when he heard voices outside, loud, aggressive voices that made his instructor instincts kick into high alert. Through the large front windows, he could see 3 men standing near the entrance, their body language radiating the kind of barely contained hostility that Marcus had learned to recognize in his years of teaching. The leader appeared to be in his mid-30s, heavily muscled with sleeve tattoos and the kind of swagger that came from years of intimidating people smaller than himself. His two companions flanked him like bodyguards, their eyes scanning the street with the predatory awareness of men looking for trouble. "Told you I'd be back," the leader was saying, his voice carrying through the glass. "Time to settle up, Sullivan." Marcus's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice now, Danny Morrison, a former student who'd been expelled from the dojo 6 months ago for starting fights with other students and refusing to respect the boundaries Marcus had established. Danny had been a problem from day one, treating martial arts like a license to hurt people rather than a discipline to master himself. The expulsion had been necessary but ugly. Danny had threatened to sue, had claimed Marcus was discriminating against him, had made vague threats about getting even that Marcus had hoped were just empty posturing. Apparently, he'd been wrong. Marcus moved toward the phone to call the police, but stopped when he saw Naomi's car pull into the parking lot. She stepped out, her movements casual and unhurried, apparently unaware of the 3 men now turning their attention toward her. "Well, well," Danny said, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "Look what we have here. Hey lady, this place is closed. You might want to find somewhere else to be." Naomi looked up at them with the same calm expression Marcus had seen her wear that first night. "I'm here to meet someone," she said simply. "Yeah? Well, we're here to meet someone too," Danny replied, stepping closer to her. "And when we're done with him, this place is going to be permanently closed. So like I said, you might want to move along." Marcus was already moving toward the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He dealt with angry former students before, but never ones who'd brought backup, never ones who seemed willing to threaten innocent bystanders. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus called out as he emerged from the dojo. "There he is," Danny said, his attention shifting away from Naomi. "Marcus fucking Sullivan, the great martial arts master. You remember me, don't you?" "I remember you, Danny," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Danny's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I want you to pay for what you did to me. I want you to admit that you're a fraud and a coward. I want you to get on your knees and apologize for humiliating me in front of everyone." "I'm not going to do that," Marcus said. "You were expelled for good reasons, and you know it." "Good reasons." Danny's face flushed red. "You threw me out because I was better than you, because I wasn't afraid to actually use what you were teaching. You couldn't stand that I was showing your precious students what real fighting looked like." "You were hurting people," Marcus said firmly. "You were using this place to work out your anger issues, and I couldn't let that continue." "Anger issues?" Danny stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You want to see anger issues? You cost me my job, Sullivan. My girlfriend left me because she said I was too aggressive. My own family won't talk to me because they think I'm some kind of violent psychopath. All because you decided to play therapist instead of martial arts instructor." Marcus felt a stab of uncertainty. He'd known the expulsion would have consequences for Danny, but he hadn't considered how far-reaching they might be. Still, he'd made the right choice. The safety of his other students had to come first. "I'm sorry your life got difficult," Marcus said. "But that doesn't change what happened here. You were given multiple warnings, multiple chances to change your behavior. You chose not to take them." "I chose to be real about what we were learning," Danny shot back. "I chose to acknowledge that all this philosophical bullshit about inner peace and controlled aggression is just pretty words wrapped around the fact that you're teaching people how to hurt each other." "That's not what martial arts is about," Marcus said. "Isn't it?" Danny gestured to his companions. "These are my new training partners. We've been working on the techniques you taught me, refining them, making them more practical. Want to see what we've learned?" Marcus became aware that Naomi had moved closer, positioning herself at an angle that would give her a clear line of sight to all three men. Her posture hadn't changed, but something in her stillness had shifted. She was no longer just watching. She was evaluating, calculating, preparing. "Danny, this doesn't have to escalate," Marcus said. "Whatever issues you have with me, we can work them out without anyone getting hurt." "See, that's your problem right there," Danny said. "You think everything can be solved with talking. You think everyone wants to be reasonable. But some problems can only be solved with violence, and some people only understand force." "Is that what you learned from me?" Marcus asked. "Because that's not what I tried to teach you." "It's what I learned from life," Danny replied. "You just gave me the tools to do something about it." One of Danny's companions, a wiry man with prison tattoos covering his forearms, stepped forward. "Danny, we didn't come here to chat. Let's do what we came to do and get out of here." "Tommy's right," Danny said. "I've been looking forward to this for months. I'm going to beat the shit out of you, Sullivan. I'm going to make you crawl. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows that the great Marcus Sullivan is just another fake who can't back up his big words. And if I refuse to fight, then I'll beat you up anyway," Danny said with a cold smile. "But at least if you fight back, you'll maintain some dignity. Maybe your lady friend here will still respect you afterward." Marcus felt his temper flare at the implication, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of situation Naomi had been preparing him for, the kind of choice she'd warned him about. He could try to de-escalate, he could call the police, he could attempt to get everyone safely inside the dojo and wait for help to arrive. Or he could accept Danny's challenge and try to end this quickly, before anyone else got hurt. "Marcus," Naomi said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough for him to hear. "You have students arriving in 20 minutes. Amanda Chun is one of them." The words hit him like a physical blow. In his focus on Danny and his companions, he'd forgotten about the evening class. Amanda would be coming, along with 15 other students, including several teenagers and a few parents who sometimes stayed to watch. "You hear that, Sullivan?" Danny had caught Naomi's words too. "Your students are coming. Your precious little disciples who think you're some kind of hero. They're going to get here just in time to watch you get humiliated. Unless you want them to see something else," the third man added. His voice was softer than the others, but somehow more menacing. "Unless you want them to see what happens when people get in our way." Marcus felt the world narrow to this moment, this choice. Everything Naomi had taught him about calculating costs and accepting consequences crystallized into a single decision point. He could try to protect his students by avoiding the fight, but that would mean letting Danny and his friends dictate the terms of the encounter. Or he could try to end this quickly and decisively, but that would mean abandoning everything he tried to teach about restraint and controlled aggression. "What's it going to be?" Danny pressed. "Are you going to fight like a man? Or are you going to hide behind your philosophy while I trash everything you've built?" Marcus looked at Naomi, hoping for some sign of what she thought he should do. But her expression remained neutral, unreadable. This was his choice to make, his line to draw. "All right," Marcus said finally. "But not here. Not in front of the dojo. We go to the parking lot behind the building, away from the street. And when it's over, it's over. No matter who wins, you leave and don't come back." "Deal," Danny said, his eyes lighting up with anticipation. "But when I'm done with you, you're going to close this place down. You're going to admit to everyone that you're a fraud and a coward, and you're going to disappear." "That's not part of the deal," Marcus said. "It is now," Danny replied. "Because you don't have a choice. You can't call the cops without looking weak. You can't back down without proving everything I've said about you. The only way out is through me." As they began moving toward the back of the building, Marcus felt a hand touch his arm. Naomi had moved up beside him, her presence both comforting and troubling. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I do," Marcus replied. If I don't, they'll hurt my students. And if I call the police, Danny will just come back later when I'm not prepared. There are other ways to handle this, Naomi said. Like what? Like letting me handle it, she said simply. Marcus looked at her, seeing something in her eyes that made him step back. No. This is my problem. These are my students to protect. I won't hide behind someone else's skills. Even if those skills are better suited to this situation. Especially then, Marcus said. If I can't protect what I've built with my own hands, then maybe I don't deserve to keep it. Naomi studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But Marcus, remember what I told you about choosing the cost you can live with. Whatever happens here, you're going to have to live with it for the rest of your life. I know, Marcus said. I've made my choice. But as they reached the parking lot behind the dojo, as Danny and his friend spread out in a loose circle, as Marcus felt the familiar pre-fight tension building in his muscles, he realized that he had no idea what he'd actually chosen. Danny was bigger than him, stronger than him, and clearly more willing to ignore the rules of civilized combat. The techniques Marcus had learned in competition, the controlled aggression he'd mastered in the dojo, suddenly felt inadequate against someone who'd come here with the explicit intention of causing serious harm. Last chance, Sullivan, Danny said, rolling his shoulders and cracking his knuckles. Get on your knees and apologize, and maybe I'll go easy on you. Marcus dropped into a fighting stance, his years of training taking over even as his mind raced with doubt. I'm not apologizing for doing what was right. Then you're about to learn what right gets you in the real world, Danny said, and launched himself forward. The first exchange was fast and brutal. Danny's opening combination was textbook perfect, the same techniques Marcus had taught him, but delivered with a viciousness that transformed them from martial arts into assault. Marcus managed to deflect the initial strikes, but Danny's follow-up caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs and sending him stumbling backward. Come on, Sensei, Danny taunted, circling him like a predator. Show me that superior technique. Show me what 6 months of philosophy was worth. Marcus tried to respond with a combination of his own, but Danny was ready for it. He'd studied under Marcus for almost a year. He knew every technique, every preferred combination, every tell that preceded Marcus's favorite attacks. He slipped the strikes easily and countered with a knee to Marcus's midsection that doubled him over. This is what I'm talking about, Danny said, grabbing Marcus by the hair and pulling his head up. You teach people to dance. I learned to fight. He punctuated his words with a knee aimed at Marcus's face, but Marcus managed to twist away at the last second, the strike glancing off his shoulder instead. He used the momentum to spin away, creating distance between them. Better, Danny said approvingly. But not good enough. The second exchange was even more one-sided. Danny had abandoned any pretense of martial arts technique in favor of street fighting tactics that Marcus had no experience defending against. He used his elbows and knees, went for pressure points and nerve clusters, fought with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd learned violence in environments where rules were luxuries nobody could afford. Marcus found himself being systematically dismantled. Every technique he tried was countered, every defensive position was broken, every attempt to create distance was thwarted. Danny wasn't just beating him, he was humiliating him, demonstrating the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. You know what the difference is between us? Danny said, landing a particularly painful strike to Marcus's solar plexus. I'm not afraid of hurting people. I'm not worried about being honorable or controlled. I'm just focused on winning. Marcus tried to respond, but his breath was coming in ragged gasps, his vision was starting to blur, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He was losing badly, and Danny was clearly enjoying every moment of it. This is what happens when you try to make violence pretty, Danny continued, his voice carrying to where Naomi stood watching. This is what happens when you pretend that being nice makes you strong. But it was that last comment, the casual cruelty of it, that finally broke something inside Marcus. All the years of trying to be better, All the effort he'd put into creating a place where people could learn without being brutalized. All the students who trusted him to teach them how to protect themselves. It was all being torn down by someone who'd learned to weaponize his own teachings. Marcus felt his control slip, felt the careful restraint he'd maintained for years finally give way to something rawer and more dangerous. When Danny moved in for what was clearly intended to be a finishing combination, Marcus met him with techniques that had nothing to do with sport fighting or controlled aggression. He went for Danny's eyes, his throat, his knees. He used his elbows and the heel of his hand, struck at nerve clusters and pressure points that would cause maximum damage. For 30 seconds, he fought with the kind of vicious intensity that Danny had been using all along. And it worked. Danny, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, found himself on the defensive for the first time in the fight. Marcus's attacks were precise and devastating, targeting vulnerabilities that Danny hadn't even known he was exposing. But the reversal was temporary. Danny's friends, seeing their leader in trouble, stepped in to help. The fair fight that Marcus had agreed to became a 3-on-1 assault that he had no chance of winning. They hit him from multiple angles, used tactics that would have been illegal in any legitimate competition, and showed no concern for his safety or well-being. Marcus found himself on the ground, trying to protect his head and vital organs, while 3 grown men kicked and punched him with systematic brutality. "Stop," he heard Naomi's voice, cutting through the sounds of violence. "That's enough." "Lady, I told you to leave," Danny panted, pausing in his assault to look up at her. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," Naomi said, and Marcus heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. "You've made it concern me." "Oh yeah." Danny straightened up, his confidence returning. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave," Naomi said. "I'm going to give you the chance to walk away from this with your dignity intact." Danny laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My dignity? Lady, I don't think you understand the situation here. Your boyfriend just got his ass kicked by someone he threw out of his own dojo. He's done. His reputation is finished. And if you don't get out of here right now, you're going to be finished too." "I understand the situation perfectly," Naomi said. "The question is whether you do." From his position on the ground, Marcus could see that Naomi had moved closer to the group, her hands visible and empty, her posture still deceptively relaxed. But there was something different about her now, something that made the air around her feel charged with potential violence. "Tommy," Danny said to his wiry companion, "explain to the lady why she should mind her own business." Tommy started toward Naomi with the swagger of someone who'd intimidated plenty of people smaller than himself. "Look, sweetheart, nobody wants to hurt you. But if you don't—" He never finished the sentence. Naomi moved with speed that seemed to defy physics, her hand striking Tommy's throat with surgical precision. He dropped to his knees, gasping for air, his eyes wide with shock and terror. "Jesus Christ," the third man whispered, taking a step backward. "What the hell was that?" Danny demanded, his confidence suddenly shaken. "That was a warning," Naomi replied calmly. "Tommy will be fine in a few minutes. His voice might be a little rough for a week or two, but he'll recover." "You just assaulted him." "I defended myself against someone who was threatening me," Naomi corrected. "Just like Marcus was defending himself against you. The difference is that I know how to do it properly." Danny looked at his 2 companions, Tommy still on his knees, gasping, and the third man backing away slowly, and Marcus could see him calculating odds that had suddenly shifted dramatically. "Who are you?" Danny asked. "I'm someone who's seen a lot of violence," Naomi replied. "Someone who knows the difference between necessary force and cruelty. Someone who's tired of watching bullies hurt people who don't deserve it." "You think you're tough?" Danny's voice had lost some of its earlier confidence, but his anger was still driving him forward. "You think because you got lucky with Tommy, you can take all of us?" "I think," Naomi said quietly, "that you should check on your friend Amanda Chun. She's in the parking lot out front, and she just saw 3 grown men beating up her instructor. She's scared, Danny. She's calling the police, and she's going to have nightmares about this for months. The words hit Danny like a physical blow. He spun around, looking toward the front of the building, and Marcus could see the exact moment when the reality of the situation penetrated his rage. "You did this," Danny said, turning back to Marcus. "You turned a simple disagreement into this mess. You made it personal." "No," Marcus said, struggling to his feet with Naomi's help. "You made it personal the moment you brought your friends to threaten my students." "I never threatened your students." "You threatened to trash everything I've built," Marcus replied, wiping blood from his mouth. "You threatened to make sure everyone knew I was a fraud. You came here with the explicit intention of destroying my livelihood and my reputation. What did you think that would do to my students?" Danny's face cycled through several emotions: anger, frustration, confusion, and finally something that might have been regret. I needed you to understand what you did to me. I needed you to know what it felt like to lose everything." "And now you do know," Naomi said, "because that's what's going to happen to you. The police are coming, Danny. They're going to arrest you for assault, for making threats, for whatever other charges they can make stick. Your friends are going to give you up to save themselves. And Marcus is going to press charges, because he has to protect his students from people like you." "People like me?" Danny's voice was hollow now, the fight going out of him as the consequences of his actions became clear. "I'm not a bad person. I'm just angry. I'm just tired of being pushed around." "So you decided to push someone else around," Marcus said. "You decided to become the thing you hate." "I learned from the best," Danny shot back, but the words lacked conviction. "No," Marcus said firmly. "You learned techniques from me. You learned philosophy from me. You learned discipline from me. What you became after that was your choice." The sound of sirens in the distance ended the conversation. Danny's remaining friend had already disappeared, leaving Tommy still gasping on the ground and Danny standing alone, his grand plan for revenge reduced to a simple assault charge and a ruined future. "I'm sorry," Danny said suddenly, the word seeming to surprise him as much as anyone else. "I'm sorry it came to this. I'm sorry I let it get so bad." "I know," Marcus said. "And I'm sorry I couldn't help you before it got this far." "You couldn't help me because I didn't want to be helped," Danny replied. "I wanted to be angry. I wanted to blame someone else for my problems. I wanted to believe that violence was the answer because it was easier than actually fixing what was wrong with me." The police arrived as Danny was saying this, their cars flooding the parking lot with red and blue light. As they began taking statements and sorting out what had happened, Marcus found himself leaning against the building, his body aching from the beating he'd taken, his mind reeling from everything that had just occurred. "You did the right thing," Naomi said, appearing beside him. "Did I?" Marcus asked. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I failed Danny, failed my students, failed myself." "You protected your students," Naomi replied. "You stood up to someone who was trying to destroy what you'd built. You chose to fight rather than let a bully dictate terms to you." "And I got beaten up for it," Marcus said bitterly. "I got humiliated in front of my students. I proved that everything Danny said about me was true." "What Danny said about you was that you were a fraud and a coward," Naomi pointed out. "A fraud wouldn't have fought at all. A coward wouldn't have put himself between a threat and his students. A competent instructor wouldn't have needed you to save him," Marcus countered. "A competent instructor wouldn't have gotten into a 3-on-1 fight with people who had no intention of fighting fair," Naomi replied. "Marcus, you did everything right except one thing." "What's that?" "You forgot that asking for help isn't weakness," she said. "You forgot that you don't have to face every challenge alone." Marcus looked at her, seeing the truth in her words but struggling to accept it. "So what happens now?" "Now you heal," Naomi said. Now you talk to your students about what they saw and help them process it. Now you figure out how to move forward without letting what happened here define you. And what about you? Marcus asked. What happens to you? Naomi was quiet for a long moment, watching the police finish their work. I don't know, she said finally. I came here to assess your security, and I ended up having to become part of it. I tried to stay in the background, tried to let you handle things your way, but in the end, I couldn't just watch you get hurt. So you're leaving? I think I have to, she said. Not because I want to, but because my presence here changes things. It changes how people see this place, how they see you. It changes the dynamic of what you're trying to build. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Marcus said. Maybe this place needs to change. Maybe, Naomi agreed. But that's a decision you need to make, not something that gets forced on you by circumstances. As the police finished their work and began loading Danny into a patrol car, Marcus realized that everything he thought he knew about himself, about his school, about his ability to protect the people he cared about, had been shattered in the span of 30 minutes. The question now was whether he could rebuild something better from the pieces, or whether the damage was too extensive to repair. The emergency room at Harborview Medical Center buzzed with its usual late-evening chaos, nurses moving between beds, the steady beep of monitors, the distant sound of ambulances arriving. Marcus sat on the edge of an examination table, his ribs wrapped in white bandages, his left eye swollen nearly shut, waiting for the doctor to finish his discharge paperwork. Naomi sat in the plastic chair beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. They'd barely spoken during the 2-hour wait, the weight of what had happened settling between them like a wall neither seemed willing to cross. You need to ice that eye every 20 minutes for the next 48 hours, Dr. Martinez said, returning with a clipboard and a small paper bag. The pain medication is for the ribs. They're bruised, not broken, but they're going to hurt for a while. And if you experience any dizziness, nausea, or changes in vision, you need to come back immediately. I understand, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from the throat strikes he'd taken. Mr. Sullivan, the doctor continued, his tone growing more serious, I need to ask, are you safe to go home? The police mentioned this was an assault by someone you knew. Is there any chance this person might try to contact you again? Marcus almost laughed at the question. Danny Morrison was in jail, facing charges for assault, battery, and making terroristic threats. His 2 companions had been arrested as well, though Tommy was currently 1 floor up getting his throat examined by another doctor. The immediate threat was over. But safe? Marcus wasn't sure he'd ever feel safe again. He's in custody, Marcus said simply. I don't think he'll be bothering me again. All right. But if you change your mind, if you need resources or support, the hospital has counselors who specialize in assault recovery. There's no shame in asking for help. After the doctor left, Marcus and Naomi sat in silence for another few minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. I need to go back to the dojo, he said. I need to see what kind of damage control I can do. Marcus. No, he interrupted, his voice sharper than he'd intended. I need to face this. I need to talk to my students, to their parents. I need to figure out how to salvage what's left of my reputation. Your reputation isn't destroyed, Naomi said quietly. You defended yourself against someone who was trying to hurt you. Your students understand that. Do they? Marcus slid off the examination table, wincing as his ribs protested the movement. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they watched their instructor get beaten up by someone he'd expelled, then watched a woman they barely know save him from further humiliation. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Marcus turned to face her, his good eye blazing with frustration and pain. Tell me, Naomi, what exactly did happen? Because I'm having trouble understanding how any of this makes me look competent to teach people how to protect themselves. Naomi stood as well, her movements controlled and deliberate. What happened is that you made a difficult choice under pressure. You chose to protect your students rather than your ego. You chose to stand up to someone who was threatening everything you'd built. And I failed, Marcus said flatly. I got beaten up, I put you in danger, and I traumatized my students. Some choice. You didn't fail, Naomi replied, her voice carrying a note of steel. You just learned something about yourself that you didn't want to know. Which is that you're human, she said simply. That you can't protect everyone from everything. That sometimes, despite your best efforts and your years of training, you're going to need help. Marcus stared at her, feeling something ugly and bitter rising in his chest. Is that supposed to make me feel better? The fact that I'm human? The fact that I'm not the instructor I thought I was? It's supposed to make you honest, Naomi replied. It's supposed to help you understand that the strength you were trying to project wasn't real strength at all. It was a facade, and it was always going to crumble eventually. So what am I supposed to do now? Marcus demanded. What am I supposed to tell my students? That their instructor is a fraud who can't even protect himself, let alone them. You're supposed to tell them the truth, Naomi said. You're supposed to tell them that martial arts isn't about being invincible. It's about being prepared, being smart, and knowing when to ask for help. Easy for you to say, Marcus shot back. You're not the one who has to rebuild a school from the ground up. You're not the one who has to look parents in the eye and explain why their children saw their instructor getting beaten up in a parking lot. No, Naomi agreed. I'm the one who has to decide whether to walk away from someone I care about because he's too proud to accept that he needs help. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own humiliation, his own sense of failure, that he'd barely considered what this meant for Naomi. She'd revealed skills she'd kept hidden, had intervened in a situation that wasn't her responsibility, had put herself at risk to protect him and his students. And his response had been to resent her for it. Naomi, he said, his anger deflating into something more complicated. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, she interrupted. And I understand why. You built your entire identity around being the strong one, the protector, the teacher. Having that challenged would be difficult for anyone. But you're not anyone, she said. You're someone I've come to respect, someone I've come to care about. And watching you tear yourself apart over something that wasn't your fault is breaking my heart. Marcus felt tears threatening, a combination of physical pain and emotional exhaustion that he was struggling to contain. I don't know how to do this, Naomi. I don't know how to be the instructor my students need if I can't even protect myself. Then maybe, she said gently, it's time to learn. They drove back to the dojo in silence, the Seattle streets reflecting the neon light of late-night businesses and the occasional street lamp. Marcus stared out the passenger window, watching the city pass by, feeling disconnected from everything he'd thought he understood about his life. The dojo parking lot was empty when they arrived, the building dark except for the security lights that cast long shadows across the pavement. Marcus had given all his students the night off after the incident, had sent them home with promises that he'd explain everything once he'd had time to process what had happened. But now, standing in front of the building that had been his sanctuary for so many years, Marcus wasn't sure he had any explanations to offer. Do you want me to come in with you? Naomi asked. Marcus considered the question. Part of him wanted to say yes, wanted to lean on her strength and experience as he tried to figure out how to move forward. But another part of him, the part that had been damaged tonight, wanted to face this alone, wanted to prove to himself that he could still handle his own problems. I think I need to do this by myself, he said finally. Naomi nodded, but made no move to leave. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. What do you think would have happened if I hadn't been there tonight? Marcus thought about it, replaying the events in his mind. I think Danny would have beaten me up worse. I think his friends would have trashed the dojo. I think by the time the police arrived, there would have been a lot more damage to clean up. And you think that would have been better? I think it would have been honest, Marcus replied. I think it would have shown everyone exactly who I really am, instead of letting them maintain their illusions about my abilities. Or, Naomi said quietly, it would have shown them that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and that the measure of a person isn't whether they can prevent every bad thing from happening, but how they respond when it does. Marcus looked at her, seeing something in her expression that made him pause. What are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that your students don't need you to be invincible, she said. They need you to be real. They need you to show them that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up when you do. And if I can't get back up? Then you let people help you, Naomi replied. You let people who care about you share the burden until you're strong enough to carry it yourself again. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the tight knot of pride and shame that had been choking him since the fight. Is that what you're offering? To help me carry the burden? I'm offering to be here, Naomi said. Not as someone who thinks you need saving, but as someone who believes you're worth saving. There's a difference. What difference? The difference between dependence and partnership, she replied. The difference between being weak and being human. Marcus stared at the dojo, at the building that represented everything he'd worked for, everything he'd tried to become. Tomorrow, he would have to face his students, their parents, the wider martial arts community. He would have to explain what had happened, acknowledge his limitations, and somehow find a way to continue teaching people how to protect themselves despite his own obvious vulnerabilities. It would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But as he stood there in the parking lot, feeling the weight of Naomi's steady presence beside him, Marcus realized that he didn't have to do it alone. Will you help me? He asked, the words coming out smaller than he'd intended. Help you do what? Help me figure out how to be honest with my students without destroying everything I've built, Marcus said. Help me understand the difference between real strength and the kind of strength I've been pretending to have. I can do that, Naomi said. But Marcus, you need to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. It's going to mean admitting things about yourself that you don't want to admit. It's going to mean changing how you teach, how you relate to your students, how you think about what it means to be a martial arts instructor. I know, Marcus said. I'm scared of that. Good, Naomi replied. Being scared means you understand what's at stake. It means you're taking this seriously. And if I can't do it? If I can't change? Then you'll have to live with the consequences, she said simply. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're stronger than you know, Marcus. Not the kind of strength you've been trying to project, but the kind of strength that actually matters. Marcus felt a strange sense of lightness, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had suddenly been lifted from his shoulders. The future was still uncertain, still frightening, but for the first time since the fight, he felt like it might be manageable. There's something else, he said. Something I need to know. What? After tonight, after everything that's happened, do you still want to be here? Do you still want to be part of this? Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the dark windows of the dojo. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. Marcus, I've spent most of my adult life walking away from things that got complicated. I've avoided commitments, avoided relationships, avoided anything that might require me to be vulnerable or dependent on other people. I told myself it was about maintaining my independence, about staying strong. But tonight, watching you make the choice to fight rather than let someone hurt your students, watching you struggle with your own limitations, watching you try to figure out how to be better, it made me realize that I've been confusing isolation with strength. I've been confusing detachment with wisdom. What are you saying? I'm saying that yes, I want to be here, Naomi replied. Not because you need me, but because I need this. I need to be part of something that matters, something that's worth fighting for. I need to stop running from complications and start embracing them. Marcus felt something warm and unexpected bloom in his chest. Even if it means dealing with more situations like tonight, Especially if it means dealing with more situations like tonight, Naomi said with a small smile. Because situations like tonight are when you find out who you really are. They're when you discover what you're actually capable of. And what do you think I'm capable of? I think you're capable of being the instructor your students actually need, she replied. Not the perfect, invincible master you've been trying to be, but the honest, dedicated teacher who's willing to admit his mistakes and learn from them. Marcus looked at her, seeing something in her expression that made his heart skip. Naomi, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why did you really come to Seattle? Because I'm starting to think it wasn't just about visiting a friend. Naomi's smile became more genuine. It wasn't. I came here because I was tired of being alone. I came here because I was tired of pretending that I didn't need anyone, that I was better off by myself. I came here because I was looking for a reason to stay in one place, to build something instead of always moving on. And did you find it? I think I did, she said quietly. I think I found something worth staying for. Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumble. The pride that had been driving him to face everything alone, the shame that had been telling him he was unworthy of help, the fear that had been convincing him that accepting support was weakness, all of it dissolved in the face of Naomi's quiet certainty. I want to try, he said. I want to try to be better, to be honest, to be the kind of instructor who doesn't pretend to be something he's not. Then that's where we start, Naomi replied. With honesty. With the willingness to be vulnerable. With the understanding that real strength comes from connection, not isolation. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. Will you help me understand what I've been missing? I'll teach you what I can, Naomi said. But Marcus, you need to understand that this isn't about me making you stronger. It's about you finding the strength you already have and learning how to use it properly. I can live with that, Marcus said. I can live with being human. Good, Naomi replied. Because that's all any of us can be. As they walked toward the dojo entrance, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not the false confidence he'd been projecting, not the brittle pride that had been driving him to prove himself, but genuine hope for the future. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, painful admissions, and the hard work of rebuilding his relationship with his students. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus felt like he wasn't facing those challenges alone. And that, he realized, made all the difference. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with ourselves, and the greatest victories come not from proving we don't need help, but from finding the courage to accept it. Marcus is about to discover that true strength isn't about standing alone, it's about knowing when to reach out. 3 weeks later, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Dragon's Path Dojo, casting the same golden rectangles across the polished floor that had been there the night everything changed. But the energy in the room was different now, quieter, more focused, somehow more real. Marcus stood before his Tuesday evening class, his left eye still showing faint traces of the bruising he'd sustained, his movements slightly more careful due to ribs that were still tender. 21 students sat in neat rows before him, their expressions attentive but different from the reverent awe he'd grown accustomed to. They looked at him now with something that felt more valuable than worship. They looked at him with understanding. Before we begin tonight's lesson, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent dojo, I want to talk about what happened here 3 weeks ago. I know some of you have questions, and I know all of you have been thinking about it. Amanda Chun raised her hand tentatively. Sensei Marcus, are you okay? I mean really okay. Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with genuine connection. I'm healing, Amanda. My body is getting better, and more importantly, I'm learning some things about myself that I probably should have learned a long time ago. Like what? Asked Kevin, the blue belt who'd been with the dojo for 2 years. Like the fact that being a good martial arts instructor isn't about being invincible, Marcus replied. It's about being honest about what martial arts can and can't do, about what I can and can't teach you, and about the difference between confidence and arrogance. He paused, looking around the room at faces that had become as familiar to him as family. Some of these students had been with him for years, had watched him build the dojo from a single room into the thriving school it had become. Others were newer, but no less important to him. "I made a mistake that night," Marcus continued. "I let my pride convince me that I had to handle a dangerous situation alone, that asking for help would somehow make me weak or unworthy of your trust. I was wrong about that." "But you were trying to protect us," said Jenny, the purple belt who'd been one of his most dedicated students. "You were trying to keep us safe." "I was," Marcus agreed. "But I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was protecting you because I thought that's what strong instructors do, not because I understood that protection sometimes means knowing when to step back and let someone more qualified handle the situation." He gestured toward the corner where Naomi sat, quietly observing the lesson as she had every Tuesday for the past 3 weeks. She'd been coming to classes not as a student, but as what Marcus had started thinking of as a consulting instructor, someone whose experience and perspective complemented his own teaching in ways that made both of them more effective. "Mrs. Washington has been helping me understand something important," Marcus said. "She's been showing me that real martial arts mastery isn't about being able to beat everyone you meet. It's about understanding when to fight, when to retreat, when to de-escalate, and when to ask for help." "Is that why she's been teaching us those new techniques?" asked Tyler, a green belt who'd initially been skeptical of Naomi's quiet teaching style. "Those techniques are part of it," Marcus replied. "But more than that, Mrs. Washington has been showing you what I should have been teaching you all along, that martial arts is about making smart choices under pressure, not about proving how tough you are." Over the past 3 weeks, Naomi had gradually become more involved in the dojo's day-to-day operations. It had started with Marcus asking her to help him understand what he'd done wrong in his confrontation with Danny Morrison. But as she begun working with individual students, demonstrating techniques that emphasized efficiency over flash, teaching principles that prioritized safety over showmanship, Marcus had realized how much his own teaching had been missing. "Sensei Marcus," Amanda said, her voice carrying the kind of innocent directness that only teenagers could manage, "can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Of course." "Were you scared that night? When those men came here?" Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with admitting vulnerability, but he pushed through it. "Yes, Amanda. I was terrified. I was scared that I wouldn't be able to protect you and the other students. I was scared that I'd let everyone down. I was scared that I wasn't as good an instructor as I thought I was." "And were you right? About not being as good as you thought?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Marcus felt the weight of 21 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting for his response. 3 weeks ago, he would have deflected the question, would have found some way to turn it back into a lesson about confidence and self-belief. Now, he found himself considering it seriously. "I think I was a different kind of instructor than I thought I was," he said finally. "I thought being a good instructor meant being the strongest person in the room, the one who always had the answers, the one who never showed weakness. But I've learned that being a good instructor means being honest about your limitations, being willing to admit when you need help, and being committed to always learning and improving." "So you're a better instructor now?" Kevin asked. "I'm a more honest instructor now," Marcus replied. "Whether that makes me better is something you'll have to decide for yourselves." He looked around the room, seeing something in his students' faces that he'd never quite noticed before. They weren't looking at him with the kind of desperate admiration that had fed his ego for so many years. Instead, they were looking at him with respect, real respect, the kind that came from seeing someone struggle with their flaws and choose to grow from the experience. "Now," Marcus said, clapping his hands together, "let's talk about what we're going to work on tonight. Mrs. Washington has been teaching me some techniques that I think will be valuable for all of you, but they're different from what we've been practicing." "Different how?" asked Jenny. "They're designed for real situations," Naomi said, speaking for the first time since the lesson had begun. "They're not about looking impressive or demonstrating your skill. They're about keeping you safe and getting you out of danger as quickly as possible. Like what happened with those men? Amanda asked. Exactly like what happened with those men, Naomi replied. Because the truth is, most real confrontations aren't fair fights between equally skilled opponents. They're situations where someone bigger or stronger or more aggressive is trying to hurt you, and your job isn't to prove you're better than them. It's to survive and protect the people you care about. Marcus watched as his students absorbed this information, seeing the shift in their understanding play out across their faces. For years, he'd been teaching them to think of martial arts as a competition, a test of skill and courage. Naomi was teaching them to think of it as a tool for survival, a way to navigate a world that wasn't always fair or predictable. Let's start with something simple, Marcus said. Mrs. Washington, would you mind demonstrating the de-escalation techniques we've been working on? For the next hour, Marcus and Naomi worked together to teach the class principles that Marcus had never fully understood before. They practiced techniques for avoiding confrontation, for recognizing when a situation was becoming dangerous, for using words and body language to defuse tension before it escalated into violence. But more than the specific techniques, they were teaching something deeper, a philosophy that emphasized wisdom over bravado, survival over victory, community over individual achievement. Remember, Naomi said as they wrapped up the lesson, the goal is never to prove how tough you are. The goal is to go home safe to the people who care about you. Everything else is just ego. As the students began filing out in small groups, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a lesson well taught. But this time, the satisfaction was different. It wasn't about impressing anyone or maintaining his reputation. It was about genuinely helping people develop skills that might keep them safe in the real world. Sensei Marcus, Amanda said, approaching him as she gathered her gear. Can I ask you something else? Always. Are you and Mrs. Washington? I mean, are you guys, like, together? Marcus felt his cheeks flush, but he managed a smile. Why do you ask? Because you guys work really well together, Amanda said with a matter-of-fact observation skills that made her one of his favorite students. And because my mom says you seem happier lately. More relaxed or something. Your mom is very observant, Marcus replied. And yes, Mrs. Washington and I are figuring things out. Good, Amanda said with a grin. She's really cool. And she makes you a better teacher. After the last student had left, Marcus and Naomi found themselves alone in the dojo, the evening light fading into the deep blue of Seattle twilight. They began their usual routine of putting away equipment and preparing the space for the next day's classes, moving around each other with the easy familiarity that had developed over the past 3 weeks. How do you think that went? Marcus asked, stacking mats in the storage area. Better than last week, Naomi replied. They're starting to understand that strength and wisdom aren't the same thing. And what about me? Am I starting to understand that? Naomi paused in her work, looking at him with the kind of steady assessment that had initially made him uncomfortable but now felt like coming home. You're getting there. You're learning to ask questions instead of assuming you have all the answers. You're learning to listen instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. Is that enough? It's a start, she said with a small smile. Personal growth is a process, not a destination. You don't just arrive at wisdom and stop there. You keep working at it every day. Marcus finished with the mats and walked over to where she was organizing the training weapons. Naomi, can I ask you something I've been thinking about? Of course. What happens now? I mean with us. With this. He gestured around the dojo. 3 weeks ago, you were just visiting Seattle. Now you're practically a co-instructor here. What's the long-term plan? Naomi set down the wooden practice sword she'd been holding and turned to face him fully. I've been thinking about that too. And I think the answer depends on what you want. What I want. Do you want me to stay? She asked simply. Not as a consultant or a temporary fix, but as a partner. Someone who helps you run this place, who shares the responsibility and the decision-making. Marcus felt his heart skip. Is that what you want? I want to build something, Naomi said. I want to be part of something that matters, something that lasts. I've spent so many years moving from place to place, never putting down roots, never committing to anything long-term. But being here, working with you, teaching these students, it's shown me what I've been missing. What's that? Purpose, she said simply. The chance to make a real difference in people's lives, not just for a few months or a few years, but for as long as they need it. Marcus moved closer to her, feeling the pull of connection that had been growing stronger every day since the night of the attack. I want you to stay. I want you to be my partner, in the dojo and in everything else. Everything else? I'm falling in love with you, Marcus said, the words coming out more easily than he'd expected. I'm falling in love with your strength, your wisdom, your willingness to challenge me when I need it. I'm falling in love with the way you make me want to be better than I am. Naomi's smile was radiant. I'm already there, she said. I've been falling in love with you since that first night, when you were so determined to impress me with your techniques. I've been falling in love with your dedication to your students, your willingness to admit when you're wrong, your commitment to being better. Even though I'm not the instructor I pretended to be. Especially because you're not the instructor you pretended to be, she replied. Because the real you is so much more interesting than the performance you were putting on. Marcus reached for her hands, feeling the calluses that spoke of decades of training, the strength that had saved him from his own pride. So what do we do now? Now we build something together, Naomi said. We take what you've started here and make it better. We create a place where people can learn real martial arts, not just choreographed techniques. We teach them to be smart and strong and wise. And us? What do we do about us? We take it one day at a time, she said. We learn to trust each other, to depend on each other, to be vulnerable with each other. We learn that love isn't about being perfect for someone else, it's about being real with them. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't experienced in years. I can do that. I can be real with you. I know you can, Naomi replied. You've been practicing for 3 weeks. As they finished closing up the dojo, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first night when Danny Morrison had forced him to confront his own limitations. His body had healed from a physical beating, but more importantly, his understanding of himself had been broken down and rebuilt into something more honest and sustainable. He was still a martial arts instructor, still passionate about teaching people to protect themselves. But now he understood that protection came in many forms. Sometimes it meant knowing how to fight, sometimes it meant knowing when not to fight, and sometimes it meant knowing when to ask for help. Marcus, Naomi said as they prepared to leave, there's something I want to show you. She pulled out her phone and opened a text message. I got this today from Amanda's mom. Marcus read the message over her shoulder. Thank you for what you've done for Amanda. She's been more confident lately, more thoughtful about conflict resolution. Whatever you and Marcus are teaching her, it's working. She told me yesterday that she feels safer knowing that strength isn't about being tough, it's about being smart. That's a lesson that will serve her well for the rest of her life. She's not the only one, Marcus said, thinking about the changes he'd seen in his other students over the past 3 weeks. They're all different now. More thoughtful, more aware of the real purpose of what we're teaching them. They're reflecting what you've become, Naomi pointed out. Students always mirror their instructors, whether we realize it or not. When you started being more honest about your limitations, they started being more honest about theirs. When you started focusing on wisdom instead of ego, they started doing the same. So what you're saying is that getting beaten up was the best thing that ever happened to me? Naomi laughed, a sound that had become one of Marcus's favorite things in the world. I'm saying that how you responded to getting beaten up was the best thing that ever happened to you. You could have doubled down on your pride, could have blamed me or Danny or circumstances. Instead, you chose to learn from it. I had a good teacher, Marcus said, leaning down to kiss her gently. You had a good heart, she replied. I just helped you listen to it. As they walked out into the Seattle evening, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with new beginnings. The dojo would continue to grow and evolve, his students would continue to learn and develop, and he would continue to discover new things about himself and about the art he dedicated his life to teaching. But more than that, he would do it all with someone beside him who understood not just his strengths, but his weaknesses, not just his successes, but his failures. He would do it with someone who loved him not for the person he pretended to be, but for the person he actually was. 6 months later, the sign outside Dragon's Path Dojo read Sullivan and Washington Martial Arts Academy. The classes were fuller than they'd ever been, the students more engaged and thoughtful, the atmosphere more focused on genuine learning than on performance. Marcus and Naomi had developed a teaching style that complemented each other perfectly, his enthusiasm and technical knowledge balanced by her wisdom and practical experience. They taught their students not just how to fight, but how to think, how to assess situations, how to make smart choices under pressure. And in the evenings, after the last student had gone home, they would sit together in the quiet dojo, planning lessons and discussing philosophy, building not just a school but a life together. Do you ever miss it? Naomi asked one evening as they reviewed the next week's curriculum. The way things used to be, when you were the undisputed master of your domain. Marcus considered the question seriously. I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. It was easier when I thought I had all the answers, when I didn't have to question my own assumptions or admit my limitations. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for all the false confidence in the world, he said. I'd rather be honestly uncertain than dishonestly sure. And I'd rather be part of something real than be alone with my certainty, Naomi replied. We make a good team, Marcus Sullivan. Yes, he agreed, pulling her close. We do. Outside, the Seattle night settled over the city like a blanket, and inside the dojo, two people who had found each other through conflict and discovered love through honesty continued building something that would last. Sometimes the quietest people carry the most shocking secrets, and sometimes the most important victories come not from proving your strength, but from admitting your weakness. Marcus Sullivan had learned both lessons, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest martial art of all was the courage to be vulnerable with someone who would help you become the person you were meant to be. Love often finds us when we least expect it and in the most unexpected ways. Marcus and Naomi's journey shows us that true strength isn't about standing alone. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better and having the courage to let them. What's the most important lesson you've learned about yourself through a relationship? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about love, growth, and the courage to be vulnerable. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to ask for help, because we all need someone to remind us that we're stronger together than we are apart. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.